It was a regular Tuesday night at the Silver Fork, a trendy upscale restaurant in downtown Austin. John, a 24-year-old waiter with dark hair and a sharp jawline, was used to the usual routine, taking orders, delivering food, and making small talk with guests. But tonight, something was different. The tension in the air felt thick, almost as if the night was waiting for a spark. And that spark came in the form of one unexpected customer. Elon Musk, or at least that's who John thought the man was, walked into the restaurant wearing a worn-out leather jacket and dark sunglasses. The man's presence was oddly unremarkable, even for someone as famous as Musk. No bodyguards, no entourage, just a man sitting alone at a two-person table in the corner, casually scanning the menu. John wasn't the type to fawn over celebrities. After all, he had his own problems. But there was something about the way the man ordered. Barely any eye contact with the server, a curt, "I'll have the steak," rare, and a dismissive nod when John asked if he needed anything else. His behavior rubbed John the wrong way. John couldn't help but notice how the man barely looked up when his food arrived. It felt as though Elon was trying to distance himself from the world around him. A billionaire who had everything, yet acted as though he didn't belong here at all. For some reason, this rubbed John the wrong way. The night dragged on, but it wasn't until Elon finished his meal that John's frustration really kicked in. As John cleared the table, he noticed the tip, or rather, the lack of one. A measly 10%. For someone like Elon Musk, that was an insult. John's blood boiled as he turned away from the table and muttered under his breath, "Typical billionaire. Can't even tip properly." He felt the weight of his words, but not enough to take them back. It wasn't just the money. It was the principle. How could someone with billions of dollars be so careless, so stingy? He didn't care about the money itself. It was about the lack of respect. John had seen this before. People with power and money often acted like they were above the rest of the world. They took things for granted. People like him, the waiters, the staff, they were disposable, their hard work invisible. And for what? To get a half-hearted tip and some cold indifference? His co-workers in the back overheard the rant. Jenny, who'd been working at the Silver Fork for 2 years, gave him a knowing look. "You know who that was, right?" John froze. His hands, which had been wiping down the table, stilled as a chill ran down his spine. He had a feeling he knew the answer. "Who?" "That was Elon Musk," she said, barely hiding a grin. "He's the owner of the restaurant. And this is his usual tip." John's eyes widened. The words hit him like a punch in the gut. The billionaire. The one who had just left him a 10% tip. His boss. The shock of realization was enough to knock the wind out of John. His face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and disbelief. He had just criticized one of the richest men in the world. Not just any billionaire, Elon Musk. The same man who had changed the world with electric cars, rockets, and his eccentric personality. And he had no idea. John stood there for a few seconds, feeling the weight of his mistake sink in. Jenny's smirk grew wider, though she didn't say anything more. She didn't need to. John tried to shake it off, but the discomfort lingered. He couldn't stop replaying the moment in his mind. Why hadn't he realized sooner? Musk was known for his outlandish behavior and sense of humor. But still, it wasn't every day that a billionaire walked into your workplace and left you a 10% tip, especially when that same billionaire owned the place. "Hey, don't feel bad," Jenny said, as though reading his mind. "He's not the easiest guy to please, trust me. We all get the same tip, no matter who we are." That didn't make John feel any better, though. In fact, it made him feel worse. How could someone like Elon Musk, someone who was out there making history every day, be so indifferent to something as simple as a tip? He pushed the thought out of his mind, focusing on the next table. But there was no escaping it, the awkward tension that had settled in his stomach. The night seemed to drag on longer than usual, and when it was finally time for John to clock out, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just messed up something big. As he changed into his jacket in the employee locker room, his coworker Rick leaned against the door, grinning. "Big fan of Elon, huh?" Rick teased. "He didn't seem too impressed with your tip critique." John shot him a look, still processing the evening. "I had no idea it was him." Rick laughed, slapping him on the back. "Well, now you do. Just don't go doing that again." Musk's got eyes everywhere. John nodded, a bitter laugh escaping him. Yeah, I'll keep that in mind. But even as he left the restaurant and stepped into the chilly night air, he couldn't help but wonder, was Elon Musk really as out of touch as he seemed? Or was there something more to him than met the eye? The question swirled in his mind, unanswered. Little did John know, that night was only the beginning of a series of events that would change his life forever. The next few days after the incident at the Silver Fork felt like a blur for John. He went through the motions of work, serving customers with a smile, but in the back of his mind, his mistake with Elon Musk lingered like a shadow. The realization of who the man was, and his position as the restaurant owner, had been hard to shake. The embarrassment gnawed at him, and it didn't help that every time he passed Jenny or Rick in the kitchen, they exchanged knowing glances. But it wasn't just the tip that bothered John. It was everything that had led up to that moment. John had never planned on being a waiter forever. He came from a modest background, one where every dollar counted. Raised by a single mother, he had grown up with the understanding that hard work and perseverance were the keys to getting ahead in life. His mother, a nurse who worked double shifts to support the family, often told him stories of her own struggles, the sacrifices she made to give John a better future. "You've got potential, John," she'd say, brushing his hair as he sat at the kitchen table, finishing his homework. "Don't let anything hold you back. You're meant for something bigger than this." John had always believed her, though as he grew older, it became harder to see a clear path. He graduated from high school with decent grades and had dreamed of pursuing a career in engineering or design, fields that felt like they could offer him the financial stability his mother had always hoped for. But life, as it often does, had other plans. College was expensive, and John didn't have the resources to attend a prestigious university. He took a few community college classes here and there, but they didn't lead anywhere substantial. Instead, he found himself working odd jobs just to make ends meet, bartending, washing dishes, delivering pizzas, until he landed a position at the Silver Fork. Working as a waiter was grueling. The hours were long, the tips unpredictable, and the expectations high, but it paid the bills, and John was good at it. He had a way with customers, friendly but not too overbearing, and he always kept his cool when things got hectic. The job allowed him to maintain some level of pride, even if it wasn't exactly the life he had envisioned. And yet, the tipping issue was always a sore spot. He had grown tired of customers who left a meager tip, especially after he'd given them his best service. The restaurant was upscale, but not all of its patrons acted like they understood the concept of good service. And then there was Elon Musk, someone who was in a league of his own, and who could have left a more generous tip if he truly wanted to. In moments like these, when the frustration would bubble up, John would remind himself of the bigger picture. He wasn't going to be a waiter forever. He couldn't afford to stay stuck in a job like this for the rest of his life. His mom's words echoed in his mind, urging him to push forward, to chase something better. But what was that something? At the restaurant, things felt like they were stagnating. John had been waiting tables for almost a year now, and despite his best efforts, he hadn't been able to get ahead. Sure, he made decent money on busy nights, but it was a job that came with little respect from the people he served, and less from the people who owned the place. The manager was nice enough, but John knew he was just another cog in the machine. There was no room for growth here, no real future. John found himself staring at the same familiar faces every day. His coworkers, the regular customers, the occasional celebrity who walked through the door. The monotony of it all weighed on him. He couldn't help but feel like he was meant for something more. And that feeling was only exacerbated by the chance encounter with Elon Musk. What was it like to be in Elon's shoes? To have the kind of influence, the kind of power, that could change the world? John couldn't even begin to imagine. But that didn't stop him from wondering. As the days went by, he found himself replaying the moment of the tip again and again. He wanted to apologize to Musk, to somehow make things right, but he didn't even know where to start. How could he approach someone like Elon? What would he even say? One evening, as John was cleaning up after a particularly busy dinner shift, his coworker Rick slid into the break room with a grin on his face. "Got a minute?" Rick asked, leaning against the doorframe. John turned, surprised by the sudden appearance. "What's up?" Rick looked around, making sure no one else was in the room, then lowered his voice. I heard you're feeling guilty about the whole Musk thing. John's face flushed. He hadn't realized how much word had spread, but then again, it wasn't a huge surprise. Gossip always found its way around the Silver Fork. I wasn't trying to be rude. I just didn't expect him to be the owner. Rick shrugged. Well, that's kind of the point. You were supposed to know, but no one does. Musk keeps things low-key. He's not interested in people treating him any differently. John frowned. I get it, but I still feel like I should have been more careful. I've been thinking about it. Maybe I should go talk to him. Rick raised an eyebrow. Talk to him? You mean apologize? John nodded. Yeah, I was wrong to judge him, especially without knowing who he was. Rick snorted. Don't stress too much about it. Musk's got thicker skin than you think. If you really want to make it right, maybe offer to buy him a drink sometime. But no guarantees he'll even remember you. John smiled weakly. I guess so. I don't know. I feel like I need to fix it. Rick gave him a pat on the back. You do you, man. But don't let it ruin your headspace. You've got bigger things to worry about than some tip. The advice was good, but John couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to Elon Musk than just being a billionaire with an eccentric tipping style. Something about the way he carried himself, so detached, yet still present, made John want to understand him better. Maybe it wasn't just about the tip. Maybe it was about the way people with power saw the world. And maybe, just maybe, it was a lesson John needed to learn for himself. John's world continued to spin on its usual axis. Busy shifts, fleeting conversations, and the occasional humdrum realization that his life wasn't moving in the direction he wanted. But despite the routine, something had changed. Every time he entered the Silver Fork, he couldn't shake the memory of his blunder with Elon Musk. The man was everywhere, even though John hadn't seen him in days. It wasn't as if John had expected Elon to show up at the restaurant every night. But after that interaction, the restaurant, the people, and even the way he viewed his own role felt different. Still, he carried on with the days, slipping into his old rhythm. The tips were still the same, some good, some bad. But he noticed that, more than ever, he'd be looking for those familiar faces, hoping for a glimpse of someone who might change his perspective, or maybe even open a door he hadn't yet considered. It was like he was waiting for a sign. Then, a week after the incident with Elon, a strange thing happened. It was a Wednesday evening, and the restaurant wasn't too crowded. The steady hum of conversation filled the air, mingling with the soft clink of glasses and silverware. John had just finished seating a couple by the window when he noticed a figure walking through the entrance, a casual but unmistakable presence. It was Elon Musk again, but this time, he wasn't alone. The man was accompanied by a small group of people, some of whom John recognized as high-profile tech entrepreneurs. They were laughing, talking, and seemingly enjoying each other's company, completely unaware of the low-key chaos that swirled around them. John's heart skipped a beat as he tried to collect himself. He wasn't sure why the sight of Musk with this group made him nervous, but something about it felt more intense. The billionaire had become a phantom in John's world, someone whose presence was both distant and deeply significant. Was this his chance? Would Elon even remember him, or would he be just another face among many? John wasn't sure how to approach the situation, but he knew that he had to at least try to act normal. He took a deep breath and made his way over to the table, trying to appear as unbothered as possible, even though his mind was racing. Good evening, John greeted the group, offering his best professional smile. Can I get you all started with some drinks? Elon glanced up at him, his face unreadable. He paused for a beat, as if considering John for a moment before nodding toward the menu. I'll have a glass of the Bordeaux, Elon said, his voice deep but casual. And the others will probably want the same. John nodded, jotting it down quickly. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but this certainly wasn't it. It was almost like nothing had changed, as if the awkwardness between them hadn't even happened. But inside, John's mind was working in overdrive. Should he apologize? Would it even matter? As John moved toward the bar to place the drink order, Jenny caught his eye. She was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, watching him with a curious expression. Everything all right? She asked in a low voice, clearly sensing his unease. John hesitated for a moment, trying to decide if he should talk about it. But before he could, Jenny gave him a reassuring look. "He's just here for a quiet dinner," she added, nodding toward Musk's table. "Don't worry about it. Just treat him like anyone else." John took a deep breath. Jenny was right. The restaurant wasn't a place for drama. It was a place for high-end service, for discretion. But he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Elon Musk than just being a billionaire with a weird tipping habit. When he returned to the table with the drinks, Elon barely acknowledged him. The group was deep in conversation, laughing at something one of the other men had said. John placed the glasses carefully on the table, trying not to disturb the flow of the moment. "Can I get you started with appetizers?" John asked, his voice steady. Elon glanced up at him briefly. "Just the oysters for now," he replied, before turning back to his companions. John nodded and moved away, feeling oddly satisfied with the interaction. He had expected more tension, more discomfort. But there was nothing, just the same aloofness that had marked their previous encounter. The evening continued without any further surprises, and by the time John was getting ready to leave for the night, he thought he might have gotten away with it. That is, until he was halfway out the door. "John." The voice stopped him dead in his tracks. His heart sank as he turned around. Elon Musk was standing near the entrance, holding a leather jacket in one hand. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a glimmer of curiosity, perhaps even amusement. "Yeah," John replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Elon walked over, his footsteps measured. The group he had been with had already left, and the restaurant was beginning to empty out. "I just wanted to say something," Elon said, pausing for a moment as he seemed to choose his words carefully. "About the tip, last week." John felt his throat tighten. This was it, the moment he had been dreading. "I'm sorry if I offended you," John blurted out before Elon could say anything else. "I didn't realize who you were, and I shouldn't have said what I did." Elon raised an eyebrow. "You didn't offend me," he said, his tone calm. "You were just speaking your mind. I respect that." John blinked, unsure of how to respond. "So you're not upset?" "No," Elon said, shaking his head with a slight smile. "I'm not upset. But you should know that I don't usually do things the traditional way. The tip is just a small part of it." John stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" Elon leaned in slightly, his voice lowering. "I own this restaurant, John, but I don't want people treating me differently just because of that. I want them to treat me like any other guest." The words hit John like a ton of bricks. Elon Musk, the owner of the restaurant, the man he had criticized, had been right there the entire time, and he had never let on. John stood there, stunned into silence. He had no idea what to say. "I appreciate your honesty," Elon continued, "and I think that's something worth respecting." He paused for a beat, before adding, "Maybe next time. Just remember that not everything is as it seems." With that, Elon turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving John alone with his thoughts. The days after Elon's brief but profound conversation with John felt like a strange mix of confusion and revelation. John had spent the last few nights replaying their exchange over and over in his mind. The more he thought about it, the more it didn't make sense. Why would Elon Musk, a man whose name was synonymous with tech innovation and space exploration, choose to own a small upscale restaurant in Austin? And why had he been so calm about John's criticism? That last part haunted him. Most people, especially billionaires, would have been offended. They might have had a laugh about it, or made some grand gesture to put the young waiter in his place. But Elon hadn't done any of that. He hadn't even scolded him. Instead, he had acknowledged John's frustration and validated his honesty. As the week passed, John found himself struggling to focus. The restaurant's usual rhythm, the back and forth between customers, orders, and the clink of plates, was starting to feel like a distant memory. His mind kept drifting back to Elon's words. Not everything is as it seems. What did that mean? Was there more to the man than just a billionaire who could leave a 10% tip and disappear into the crowd? Was there something deeper to his decision to own a restaurant, to remain so anonymous in his actions? John couldn't stop thinking about it. And then, one Friday night, the chance to find out more arrived, just when he least expected it. It was a busy evening at the Silver Fork. The kind of night that made John feel like he was walking a fine line between chaos and control. Servers hustled between tables, food orders piled up, and the noise from patrons filled the air. John was in his element, focused, fast-paced, and precise. Just as he was clearing a table, one of the other waiters came up to him, breathless. "John, you're up for table 7. Musk's back. And this time, he's got company." John's stomach churned. Elon again? And now, with others? His thoughts raced as he set down the tray he was holding. "Got it," he muttered, though inside, his pulse quickened. This was different. He hadn't expected to see Elon again so soon, especially not after their last encounter, but he didn't have much of a choice. He had to put his feelings aside and be professional. As John walked toward table 7, he couldn't help but glance over. Elon was sitting with a group of 4 people, some familiar faces from the tech world, and they were deep in conversation. A couple of them were laughing at something Elon had said, but John couldn't make out the words. He took a deep breath, straightened his posture, and approached. "Good evening, Mr. Musk. How are you tonight?" John said, doing his best to keep his voice calm. Elon looked up from his conversation, making brief eye contact with John. His lips curled into a small smile, but he didn't say anything right away. Instead, he nodded toward the menu. "We'll have the usual," he said. His tone was light, almost playful. John didn't miss the unspoken acknowledgement between them. Elon wasn't treating him like an inferior or even as someone to be ignored. He was treating him like a person, just another part of the evening's dynamic. But there was still a nagging curiosity in John's mind that wouldn't let go. As John moved to place the order, he found himself considering Elon's presence again. This time, though, he felt different. The man sitting at the table was no longer just the billionaire who had been on the receiving end of John's criticism. He was a figure who embodied mystery, someone whose life seemed to operate on a different level, a level that John had barely begun to understand. A few minutes later, John returned with their drinks. As he set the glasses on the table, Elon glanced up again, this time with a little more curiosity in his gaze. "So, John," Elon said, his voice a little more relaxed than the last time they spoke, "what's your story? You don't strike me as the kind of guy who plans to serve tables forever." John blinked, taken aback by the directness of the question. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this was the kind of thing Elon did. He asked questions, he probed for deeper answers, and he didn't hold back. It wasn't just about small talk. No, John said slowly. "I don't plan on being a waiter for the rest of my life. I've got bigger plans." He paused, then added, "But I'm not sure where that leads yet." Elon leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. "You know, that's the same thing I said when I started out. I was building companies and trying to get them off the ground. People didn't believe in me, and they didn't believe in the ideas I had." John raised an eyebrow. "So, you didn't always have it figured out?" "No, definitely not," Elon said, shaking his head. "But I believed in my vision, and I worked my ass off to make it happen. There were a lot of times when I could have walked away. A lot of people told me I was wasting my time." He paused for a moment, as if weighing his words. "But you don't succeed by doing what everyone else expects you to do. You succeed by staying true to what you believe in, even when things seem impossible." John felt a small spark of inspiration light up inside him. He had heard stories about Elon Musk, of course, about how he had revolutionized entire industries and made headlines for his ventures in space and electric cars. But hearing it from the man himself, sitting across the table from John in a casual restaurant, felt different, more real, more attainable. "Sounds easy enough," John said with a slight grin, though he was starting to understand the weight of what Elon was saying. "It's not," Elon responded, leaning forward, his voice lowering a bit. "But the hard things are often the ones worth pursuing." John stared at him, feeling a new kind of admiration and something else. It wasn't just about Elon's success or his wealth. It was about the mindset that drove him, the way he saw the world, and the kind of risk he was willing to take to change it. It was something John had been missing in his own life. Belief in himself and in the possibility of something bigger. "I've been thinking a lot about your words," John admitted, his voice quieter, "about how nothing is as it seems. It's like I was stuck in my own view of things, you know? I saw the tip, and I thought I had it all figured out, but I didn't see the bigger picture. Elon gave him a slow nod. That's the key, John. Don't ever get stuck in one way of thinking. Life's too short for that. You've got to be willing to see the possibilities, even when they seem hidden behind something small, like a tip. John's mind was racing. The conversation wasn't just about Elon's attitude toward tipping anymore. It was about understanding the world around him in a whole new way, about taking chances, pushing boundaries, and realizing that sometimes the smallest moments could lead to the biggest changes. Before he could say anything else, Elon stood up, ready to leave. I'll leave you to your shift, Elon said with a smile. But just remember what I said. You're capable of more than you think. John stood there, watching him go. This time, though, there was no lingering discomfort, no regret. Only the quiet realization that he had been given something more valuable than just a lesson on tipping. He had been given a glimpse into the mindset of a man who had changed the world. And maybe, just maybe, he could do the same, if he took the right steps. After that conversation, John found himself thinking about Elon Musk more than he expected. The night had shifted something in him, something he couldn't quite name. Elon had said that life was too short to get stuck in one way of thinking, and for some reason, those words kept replaying in John's mind, like a mantra. But the real question was, what would he do with that perspective? How could he apply it to his own life, which, right now, felt small and inconsequential? He had always thought of himself as someone with big dreams, but they had always seemed so far out of reach. The pressure to stay afloat, to keep his job, to meet everyone else's expectations, those things clouded his vision. It was easier to stay in his lane and just make it through another shift. It was easier to remain comfortable, to not rock the boat. But now, after talking to Elon, that comfort felt stifling. The truth was, John had been playing it safe for too long. He had spent years treading water, never taking the risks that could make him truly see what he was capable of. And that had to change. Over the next few weeks, John began to take small steps toward breaking out of his comfort zone. He started researching other career paths, talking to customers about their lives and careers. He began to look for opportunities beyond the restaurant, beyond the routine that had defined him for so long. It wasn't easy, but each day, he felt a little more like the person Elon had described. The person willing to take chances, even if the path ahead wasn't clear. But it wasn't just about career moves. John also began to examine his personal life more closely. He realized how much of his identity had been shaped by the opinions and expectations of others. Whether it was his family, friends, or even the regular customers who came to the restaurant, John had always lived for others, rather than for himself. One evening, as John was walking into the break room before his shift, he bumped into Jenny. She was flipping through a menu when she looked up at him, her eyes filled with curiosity. "Hey, what's up? You look like you've got something on your mind." John paused, unsure of how to put his thoughts into words. He had spent so much time keeping everything inside, but now it felt like it was all coming to the surface. "I don't know," he admitted, sitting down next to her. "I've been thinking a lot about some things. About what I want in my life. About where I'm going." Jenny raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Okay, what's going on? You've always seemed pretty content here." "I was content," John said, his voice quieter now. "But I'm not anymore. I realized I've been letting other people tell me what I should want, what I should do. I'm not really living for myself. I've just been existing." Jenny gave him a sympathetic look. "You know, it's okay to feel that way. But you have to take control. No one can do it for you. The world doesn't wait for you to figure it out." "I know," John said, the weight of her words hitting him. "But I guess I'm afraid. Afraid of failing, of making a wrong choice." Jenny smiled softly. "Everyone's afraid of failing. The trick is, you don't let that fear stop you. You use it to push forward. That's how you grow." John sat back in his chair, letting her words sink in. She was right, of course. Fear had always been his greatest obstacle. But now, he was beginning to see that it didn't have to be a wall. It could be a stepping stone. He had the ability to step beyond it, to move towards something more. A few days later, John found himself back at the Silver Fork, serving a busy Saturday night. The place was packed, the energy high. As usual, Elon was there, seated in the same spot by the window, with another group of tech entrepreneurs. This time, John felt different. He wasn't nervous or hesitant. There was no lingering awkwardness between them. Instead, there was a quiet sense of understanding, an unspoken recognition that they were both on different paths, but paths that could, in some way, intersect. John approached the table with his usual professionalism, his mind clear. "Good evening, Mr. Musk," he said, offering a warm smile. "How are you tonight?" Elon looked up at him, the same calm expression on his face, but there was something more now. A quiet acknowledgement that John had changed in some way, perhaps not in a grand, noticeable way, but in the way he carried himself. "I'm doing well, John," Elon said, his voice relaxed. "How about you? How's your shift going?" "It's going well," John replied, surprised by how comfortable the conversation felt. "Actually, I've been thinking a lot about things, like you said, about not getting stuck in one way of thinking." Elon raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Oh, what does that mean?" John paused for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. "It means I've been looking at my life in a different way, thinking about where I'm going, not just where I've been. I'm starting to take some risks." Elon nodded slowly, clearly considering John's words. "That's good to hear. Life's all about pushing boundaries. Sometimes, you have to step into the unknown to truly grow." John smiled. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was on the right path. As he walked away to place their order, he couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come in such a short time. He wasn't sure exactly where his journey would take him, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid of the unknown. Instead, he was excited by it. The days following John's newfound sense of purpose felt both exhilarating and terrifying. It was as if a switch had flipped inside him, and the once stale air around him now felt charged with possibilities. He still worked his shifts at the Silver Fork, but everything had changed. He started looking at his time in the restaurant less like a temporary gig and more like an opportunity to meet people, learn, and grow. But most importantly, he saw it as a stepping stone toward something greater. John wasn't sure exactly what that something greater was yet, but he had started taking the first steps toward a different life. The fear of failure that had once paralyzed him was still there, lingering like a shadow. But now, he understood something he hadn't before. Failure wasn't the end. It was just another part of the journey. One evening, after another shift at the Silver Fork, John was sitting in the break room when Jenny came in, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Hey," she said, taking a seat next to him. "I've been thinking about you lately." John raised an eyebrow. "Thinking about me? That's a little weird, don't you think?" Jenny laughed, nudging him with her elbow. "No, seriously. I've noticed something's changed. You've been walking around like you've got a secret or something. I can tell you're thinking bigger now." John shrugged, a slight smile creeping onto his face. "I guess I am. Just trying to figure out where I'm going. It's a little scary, but also kind of exciting." Jenny studied him for a moment, as if weighing something in her mind. "I've got a friend who works in business development. They're always looking for new, driven people. You might want to check it out if you're serious about changing your path." John looked at her, intrigued. "Business development? I don't really know much about that." "You don't have to," she replied. "But you've got the drive and the work ethic. And if you want something different, it's all about getting your foot in the door. Sometimes that's all it takes." John felt a jolt of excitement. It had been a while since anyone had suggested something that could shift his direction so dramatically. The idea of working in business development felt like a huge leap, but it also felt like the right kind of challenge. Maybe this was the next step, the beginning of something new. "I'll think about it," John said, already turning over the possibilities in his mind. The restaurant had always been his comfort zone, but it was clear to him now that comfort wasn't enough anymore. He needed to start moving forward, towards something that pushed him, something that would help him grow. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. John spent his free time researching business development, reading about the field, and even looking up potential job openings. He found himself drawn to the world of technology startups, where innovation and growth were the heartbeat of the industry. The idea of being a part of something that could change the world excited him. He saw how Elon Musk had revolutionized industries by thinking outside the box, by challenging the status quo. Maybe he could do something like that, maybe in a way that was uniquely his own. But the more John learned, the more he realized how much he still didn't know. Business development was a field filled with strategy, negotiations, and complex decision-making. It wasn't just about showing up and working hard. It was about understanding markets, trends, and how to build relationships that created value. He wasn't sure he was ready for all of that, but he knew that waiting around wouldn't get him anywhere. One evening, as he was sitting at his kitchen table scrolling through job listings, he received a text message from Jenny. "Jenny, hey, I talked to my friend. They're willing to meet you. They said to send your resume over." John's heart skipped a beat. This was it, his first real shot at something different. He had been nervous about taking the leap, but now that the opportunity was in front of him, he couldn't afford to hesitate. Without thinking twice, he quickly put together a resume, highlighting the skills he had learned at the restaurant, customer service, multitasking, communication, and added a cover letter explaining his desire for growth and a new challenge. He sent the email. Then, he sat there, staring at the screen for a moment. What had he just done? This was real. He had just taken the first step into the unknown, a step that could change everything. The weight of the decision hit him all at once. He had moved beyond the comfort zone of serving tables. There was no turning back now. A few days later, John was sitting in a coffee shop, nervously sipping his latte as he waited for his interview. He had learned the basics about business development, but he wasn't sure what to expect. The person he was meeting with, Jamie, had been recommended by Jenny, and they were known for working with several tech startups. It was a chance to make an impression, but he wasn't sure if he had what it took. When Jamie walked in, John stood up, extending his hand. Jamie was in their early 30s, dressed in a smart casual outfit, and exuded a calm confidence. They smiled, shook his hand, and gestured for him to sit down. "So, John," Jamie began, after they had both settled in, "Jenny says you're a hard worker and someone who's looking to make a change. What makes you interested in business development?" John took a deep breath. He had rehearsed this answer in his mind countless times, but now that the moment was here, he had to be honest. "I've been a waiter for a while now," he started, choosing his words carefully. "I've learned a lot about people, about communication, and about problem solving. But what I realized is that I've been letting my circumstances define me. I've been comfortable, too comfortable. I want more. I want to be part of something that pushes boundaries and changes things. I want to take what I've learned in customer service and apply it in a new way." Business development, from what I understand, is all about creating connections and finding ways to grow a business. And that's what I want to do, help people grow while growing myself. Jamie listened intently, nodding as John spoke. "That's a solid answer, John. The skills you've developed as a waiter can translate well into this field. It's all about relationships, strategy, and problem solving. I can see that you've got the drive. The question is, are you willing to learn everything else that comes with it?" John met Jamie's gaze, feeling the weight of their words. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "I'm willing to learn. I'm ready to take that next step." The days after John's interview were a blur. He felt like he was walking on air, unsure whether he was excited or nervous, or both. The conversation with Jamie had gone better than he'd expected, but the waiting was still agonizing. Every day, he checked his phone obsessively, hoping for an email or a message. It felt as though his entire future hinged on this one opportunity. His shifts at the Silver Fork seemed different now, like the place belonged to someone else. His body moved automatically, serving drinks, taking orders, clearing plates, but his mind was somewhere else. He was no longer just a waiter. He was a person on the verge of something new, something bigger. As the days dragged on, John's thoughts began to wander back to his conversation with Elon Musk. That one small, seemingly inconsequential chat had turned out to be the catalyst for everything. It wasn't just about tipping or the restaurant anymore. It was about everything he had been missing: the ambition, the risk-taking, the drive to do more than just get by. But no matter how much John thought about it, he couldn't shake the nagging worry. What if he wasn't ready? What if he wasn't enough? The thought of failing in a completely new environment, without the safety net of the restaurant, was terrifying. It was early one Thursday morning, about a week after his interview, when his phone buzzed. John picked it up, his heart racing as he saw the name at the top of the message. Jamie. Hi, John. I wanted to reach out and let you know that we've decided to offer you the position. We're excited to bring you on board. Let's talk next steps soon. John's breath caught in his throat. He reread the message 3 times, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The position was his. He quickly typed a response. John, thank you. I'm beyond excited. Looking forward to hearing from you soon. As soon as he hit send, the reality of what had just happened hit him. His life was about to change. He had landed a job in business development, something he had never even considered just a few months ago. He would no longer be working in the restaurant. The comfortable routine that had defined his life for years was now gone, replaced by something unknown, uncertain, and full of potential. The following days were a whirlwind of paperwork, onboarding processes, and endless training materials. John could hardly keep up, but he didn't mind. He had asked for this change, and now that it was happening, he was eager to dive in. The excitement in his chest grew with every new thing he learned. The company he would be working for was a fast-paced tech startup, full of young, driven people who were passionate about disrupting industries. It was everything John had hoped for, everything he had been yearning for since that fateful conversation with Elon. But just as things were starting to feel real, he received a message that caught him off guard. Elon Musk. Hey John, I heard you're moving on from the restaurant to try something new. Just wanted to say, good luck with your next step. Keep pushing yourself, and don't let anyone tell you that you can't do it. John stared at the message for a few moments, astonished that Elon would reach out to him again. He hadn't expected anything like this. He typed a quick reply. John, thanks so much, Elon. Your words really stuck with me, and they gave me the push I needed. I'll keep pushing forward, for sure. That message meant more to John than he could express. It was like the universe was sending him a sign that he was on the right path, that the decision he had made wasn't just his own. It felt like a confirmation from the very person who had unknowingly inspired him to make that leap. The first day at the new job arrived faster than John expected. He had spent hours picking out his clothes, rehearsing his introduction in the mirror, and mentally preparing for the whirlwind of new experiences. His first day was filled with meetings, briefings, and introductions to new colleagues. He tried to take everything in, but there was so much information to process. It was overwhelming, yet exhilarating. His team was young, vibrant, and filled with energy. Everyone seemed excited about the work they were doing, and John felt like a small fish in a vast ocean of ambition and talent. But he didn't let that intimidate him. He was there for a reason. He was meant to be part of this world, and he was determined to prove himself. At the end of his first week, John found himself in a meeting room with the rest of his team, brainstorming ideas for a new product launch. The energy in the room was infectious. Ideas bounced off the walls, everyone contributing something, and John realized how different this world was from his old job. This wasn't about following orders or simply doing what you were told. It was about collaboration, creativity, and taking ownership of your work. When the meeting ended, John felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. It had been an intense first week, but it was also the most fulfilling week of work he'd ever had. He realized that this was where he was meant to be, surrounded by people who weren't afraid to challenge each other and push the envelope. That evening, John sat in his small apartment, reflecting on the past few weeks. From the moment he'd criticized Elon's tipping to this moment, everything had shifted. He wasn't just living for the weekend or for the next paycheck anymore. He was living for the journey, for the growth, and for the challenge of creating something new. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the thought of the restaurant, the place where everything had started. It had been his home for so long, a place of familiarity and security. Yet, now, it felt distant, as though he had moved into an entirely different world. And despite all the excitement of his new job, there was a part of him that felt a twinge of nostalgia for the days when he had simply been John the waiter, taking orders and making tips. But the truth was, he was no longer that person. And that was okay. He had taken the leap, and there was no going back. John's second week at the startup felt like a blur. Each day brought new challenges, new faces, and more learning. He quickly realized that business development wasn't just about selling a product or negotiating deals. It was about understanding people, their needs, and how to create value that resonated with them. He had always been good with people, but in this environment, he needed to refine those skills in a way he hadn't anticipated. Every meeting, every conversation, felt like a test, and John, for the first time in a long while, was eager to rise to the challenge. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. His colleagues were sharp, ambitious, and some of them seemed to have been in the industry for years. John, on the other hand, was new. He often felt like the odd one out in meetings, not because anyone treated him differently, but because he still had so much to learn. He was playing catch-up, and while the adrenaline kept him going, the pressure was starting to build. One afternoon, John found himself in a meeting with one of the senior executives, Derek, who had been assigned to mentor him. Derek was a seasoned veteran in the tech industry, with a sharp mind and a no-nonsense attitude. John admired him, but he also found him intimidating. Today, Derek was taking John through a potential partnership pitch with a big tech company, and John had been asked to provide input. "So, John," Derek said, folding his arms and leaning back in his chair, "you've been looking over the materials for this pitch, right? What do you think?" John's heart raced. He had spent hours studying the materials, going over every detail, but now that the moment had arrived, his mind was blank. He hadn't expected to be asked to speak up so soon. What if he said something wrong? What if he messed it up? He cleared his throat. I think the partnership could be a good fit," he began, his voice shaky at first. "Both companies align in terms of their tech stacks and market focus. The product offerings complement each other, so there's potential for cross-selling, especially in the enterprise sector." Derek didn't immediately respond, which only heightened John's anxiety. "Keep going," he encouraged. Taking a deep breath, John pushed forward. "If we approach it from the angle of co-marketing and joint product development, we could leverage each other's strengths to get in front of a wider audience. I also noticed there's an opportunity to expand on their distribution channels, especially through their partnerships in Europe. That could open up new avenues for us." Derek raised an eyebrow. "That's not bad. In fact, that's actually pretty solid. But you're still holding back, John. I want to hear more. What's your gut feeling about this?" John paused, his nerves a little less overwhelming now. "I think we need to act fast. The window for this partnership is closing soon. If we don't jump on it now, someone else will. But I also think we need to be careful about overcommitting. We want to make sure both sides can deliver on what's being promised." Derek leaned forward, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "There you go. That's the kind of thinking I like to see. Don't just think about what makes sense on paper. Think about how it feels, what's at stake. This deal could be a game changer, but only if we're willing to take calculated risks." "You're getting there, John." John felt a rush of relief. The pressure was still there, but the tension in his shoulders eased. He hadn't nailed the pitch perfectly, but he had contributed something meaningful, and that was a huge step forward. He was beginning to see that the world of business development wasn't about being perfect. It was about learning, adapting, and getting better every day. That evening, John couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come in such a short time. He remembered his first days at the Silver Fork, serving food, making small talk with customers, keeping things running smoothly. It had been a good job, and he had learned a lot from it. But now, in this new world, he felt like he was part of something bigger. The stakes were higher, the challenges more complex, but he was ready for it. He was hungry for more. When he got home, he texted Jenny. "John, hey, I just wanted to say thanks again for connecting me with that job. It's been a wild ride, but I'm learning so much. I still can't believe this is my life now. Jenny, I'm so proud of you, John. You've got this. Keep pushing forward. There's more where this came from." John smiled at the message. It felt good to know that Jenny, someone who had seen him at his lowest, was now cheering him on as he took these steps towards something bigger. She had always believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. And now, as he looked at his future, he realized he had more belief in himself than he ever thought possible. A few days later, John received an email from Derek asking him to attend a meeting with the executive team. He was told it was about the partnership pitch, but it wasn't clear what the agenda was. Nervous but determined, John walked into the conference room early that morning. The room was filled with people: Derek, the CEO, some of the marketing leads, and others John hadn't met yet. They were all gathered around the large table, papers and laptops open in front of them. Derek gestured for John to take a seat. "We've been reviewing the partnership pitch," Derek said, "and we want you to take the lead on this. You've shown potential in the initial meetings, and we believe you're the right person to steer this in the right direction." John's eyes widened. He had barely been at the company for a couple of weeks, and now they were asking him to lead one of the most important deals they were working on. It was both an honor and a huge responsibility. "Wait, you want me to lead the pitch?" John asked, unable to hide his surprise. Derek nodded. "That's right. You've got the vision, and we trust you. Don't overthink it. Just keep doing what you've been doing." John nodded, trying to suppress the feeling of panic rising in his chest. He wasn't sure if he was ready, but he knew one thing for certain. This was his chance. This was the moment where he could prove not just to his colleagues, but to himself that he belonged in this world. That he was more than just the waiter who had criticized Elon Musk's tipping. He was a person who could take risks, make decisions, and change his life, and the lives of those around him. John stood in front of the sleek, glass-walled conference room, nervously adjusting his tie. His palms were sweaty, his mind racing, and his heart felt like it was beating out of his chest. Today was the day he would present the partnership pitch to the executives at the tech company that could change everything for his startup. The pressure was immense, but John had worked hard to get to this point, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. As he waited for the meeting to begin, he glanced at his notes one last time. The talking points were clear, the data was solid, and the strategy had been discussed and fine-tuned over the past few days. But even so, there was an undeniable uncertainty in the pit of his stomach. He had been thrust into this position after only a few weeks at the company, and the responsibility felt heavier with every passing moment. "John, you ready?" Derek's voice broke through his thoughts. The senior executive had arrived, his usual calm demeanor betraying a hint of excitement. John nodded, taking a deep breath. "Ready as I'll ever be." Derek gave him a reassuring smile. "You've got this. Just remember to stay calm, stick to the facts, and be confident. You're the expert here." John forced a smile and followed Derek into the room, his mind already running through the presentation in his head. The room was full of sharp, attentive faces: the CEO, the chief marketing officer, and several others who had been with the company for years. The stakes had never felt higher. The pitch started smoothly. John led with the market analysis, showing how the partnership could fill an important gap in both company strategies. He demonstrated how the combined effort would not only benefit both parties financially, but also position them as leaders in an emerging market. He was confident, his words coming easily as he spoke about the numbers and projections, but it wasn't until he got to the second part of the pitch that the nerves started to resurface. Now, he was moving into the strategy for execution, how they would integrate their products, streamline logistics, and create a joint marketing campaign. His mind raced as he tried to keep up with the flow of the meeting. Each question from the CEO and other team members brought a new challenge, but John remained calm, answering each with clarity and precision. Then, it happened. The CEO, a woman named Lisa, leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she asked a question that struck a chord deep inside him. "So, John, you've mentioned how this partnership can help expand our reach in Europe. But how do you plan to handle the logistical challenges of scaling so quickly? You know as well as I do that rapid expansion can introduce risks. What's your contingency plan if we run into issues on the ground?" For a brief moment, John froze. The question was a good one that he hadn't fully anticipated. He had discussed the basics of scalability in their internal meetings, but he hadn't delved as deeply into potential risks. The last thing he wanted was to come off as unprepared in front of these experienced executives. His mind was racing, but then, something unexpected happened. A feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time, confidence, began to take hold. He thought back to all the challenges he had faced in his life, from his time at the Silver Fork to his recent leap into business development. Every step had been filled with uncertainty, but it was precisely that uncertainty that had forced him to grow. Without thinking too much, he spoke. "You're right. Rapid expansion does come with risks, especially in an international market. But we've already done some preliminary work with third-party logistics providers in Europe. We've identified a few reliable partners who can handle the volume, and we've built flexibility into the plan to scale up gradually. The key is to stay agile. If one partner faces issues, we've got backup plans in place to ensure minimal disruption. We'll monitor the situation closely and adjust as needed. There was a brief silence in the room, and John's heart was pounding in his chest. Had he said the right thing? Would they buy it? Lisa looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "That's a solid answer," she said, and a slight smile appeared on her face. "I like that you're thinking ahead and acknowledging the potential challenges. It shows you're prepared." John felt a wave of relief wash over him, but he didn't let himself relax just yet. The meeting was far from over, and he knew the next questions could be even more difficult. But as the discussion continued, John found his footing. He answered every question with poise, even when they delved into the details of marketing strategies and customer segmentation. His confidence grew with every answer, and by the time the pitch wrapped up, he felt like a completely different person than the nervous newcomer who had walked into the room just an hour ago. As the meeting concluded, Derek gave him a look of approval. "You did great, John. Really solid work." John tried to hide his grin, but he couldn't help it. He had done it. He had survived the pitch and, more importantly, he had nailed it. The next few days were a whirlwind of emails, follow-ups, and internal discussions. But finally, the verdict came through. The partnership was a go. The executives had given the green light to move forward with the deal, and John's role in securing the partnership was officially recognized. He had done it. The sense of accomplishment was overwhelming. He had been thrust into a high-pressure situation and had come out on top. The nervous waiter who had stumbled over his words just a few months ago had transformed into someone capable of handling complex business negotiations with confidence. But even as he basked in the glow of his success, John knew this was just the beginning. The tech world was full of challenges, and there would be plenty more obstacles to overcome. Still, he felt a quiet sense of pride in himself. He had come so far, and now there was nothing holding him back. That night, John sat at his kitchen table, sipping a cold beer and reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. He thought back to his time as a waiter, when life had seemed so much simpler, and yet so much harder at the same time. Back then, he had been stuck in a cycle of routine, unsure of where he was headed. But now, everything felt different. The world felt full of possibilities. His phone buzzed, and when he checked it, he saw a message from Jenny. "Jenny, I heard the pitch went well. Congratulations, John. You're killing it." John smiled and quickly typed back, "John, thanks, Jenny. I couldn't have done it without you. Seriously, you've been a huge part of this journey. I'm just getting started." He set the phone down and looked out the window, his thoughts drifting toward the future. There was still so much to learn, so much to do, but for the first time in a long time, John wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. He was ready, and no matter what happened next, he was determined to keep pushing forward. John had barely recovered from the excitement of the partnership deal when a new challenge appeared on the horizon. It wasn't anything he had expected, something completely outside the realm of the business world, and yet it felt just as significant. One evening, as he walked home from work, his phone buzzed. It was a message from a number he didn't recognize. Unknown, "Hey John, this is Elon Musk. I want to talk to you about something." John's heart skipped a beat. He stared at the text for a long moment, as if it might disappear if he blinked. Elon Musk? The Elon Musk? The billionaire tech mogul? He stared at the screen, unsure whether this was some kind of prank or a legitimate message. After a few moments of uncertainty, his fingers shook as he typed a response. "John, hi, Elon. I'm not sure if this is a joke, but if this is really you, I'd love to chat. What's going on?" He hit send, and the seconds felt like hours. His phone buzzed again almost immediately. "Elon, no joke. I heard about your comment on the tipping situation, and I think you've got some interesting perspectives. We need to talk. Call me when you can." John stared at the screen. What had he even said about tipping? Sure, he'd made a comment to a few people at the restaurant about Musk's infamous stance on tipping and how it seemed odd, especially for someone who could afford it, but it had never been anything serious. Just a fleeting conversation, a passing remark. Had it really reached Musk? John's mind was spinning. What could this even mean? He had no idea what the conversation would be about, but one thing was clear. It wasn't a coincidence. Somehow, this message had found its way to him, and he had no choice but to answer. Taking a deep breath, John dialed the number. "Hello?" came a familiar voice on the other end of the line. Hello, Elon? This is John. John Carlson," he said, nervously trying to keep his voice steady. There was a slight chuckle on the other end. "Yes, John. I know who you are. I've been following your journey for a while. Quite the impressive transition from waitstaff to business development, huh?" John swallowed. Thanks. I didn't expect to be hearing from you." Elon's tone was relaxed, almost casual, as if they were just two people having a conversation at a coffee shop. "Well, I don't blame you. Most people are surprised when I reach out. I don't do it often, but your thoughts on tipping stuck with me. I thought maybe we could talk about it." John paused. "Wait, are you really asking me about tipping? Like, my thoughts on the whole thing with you?" "Exactly," Elon replied. "I've been critiqued on this for years, and I'm always curious to hear what the other side has to say. I've seen some of your posts, and there's something in your perspective that I think is worth exploring." John was completely caught off guard. This wasn't at all what he had anticipated. A conversation about tipping? With Elon Musk? It seemed so trivial compared to everything he had been working on lately. But then, he reminded himself that no conversation with someone like Musk could be trivial. There had to be more to it. "Okay, sure," John said, finding his voice. I guess I've always felt like the whole tipping system is broken. People shouldn't be dependent on tips to make a living, especially in industries where workers are already underpaid. It feels like the responsibility should fall on the business owners to ensure employees are compensated fairly from the start, rather than relying on customers to fill in the gaps. Elon's voice was thoughtful. "That's a fair point. A lot of people feel the same way. It's an outdated system that doesn't benefit anyone in the long run. But there's a lot of nuance to it, don't you think?" John nodded, even though he knew Elon couldn't see him. "Yeah, I do. The problem is, I think it's too ingrained in our culture for anything to change. People expect it, and in some ways, it becomes this social pressure, both for customers and employees." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. When Elon spoke again, his voice was more serious. "I agree. That's why I've been working on something that could revolutionize the way people think about tipping, or rather, remove the need for it altogether." John was intrigued. "What do you mean? You're working on a solution?" Elon chuckled. "Of course. I've got a lot of ideas, John, but this one might be the most interesting. I've been experimenting with a new model in some of my businesses, where we completely eliminate tipping. We pay all our employees a fair wage, no tipping allowed. Instead, we focus on providing a great experience for customers that's valued on quality and service. And it's been working." John could hardly believe what he was hearing. He had no idea Musk was involved in something like this. "So, you're saying you're getting rid of tips altogether?" "Exactly," Elon replied. "We're flipping the script. Tipping is just an outdated way of doing business. If we pay our workers well and treat them right, customers will appreciate the experience itself, not feel like they have to reward someone for doing their job." John felt a rush of excitement mixed with skepticism. That sounds incredible. But how are customers responding? Some people like tipping. They feel like it's their way of showing appreciation. "True," Elon said. "But the goal isn't to take away their ability to show appreciation. It's to give customers a better experience. And if that means getting rid of a broken system that forces workers to depend on gratuities, then it's worth it." John let that sink in. The idea was radical, but it made sense. It felt like something Musk would get behind, a disruption of the status quo. But at the same time, he wondered about the practicalities. Could this actually work? "I've been testing it in a few of my restaurants," Elon continued, "and it's been successful. Now, I'm planning to expand this model, but I wanted to talk to you about it. I think someone with your experience could bring valuable insights. You've been in the industry, you understand the struggles." John's mind raced. Was this really happening? Was Elon Musk offering him a chance to get involved in something as revolutionary as this? I'd love to help, John said, finally able to articulate his thoughts. This could be the future of hospitality. I mean, this could change everything. I'm in. After the call, John felt like his head was spinning. He had just spoken to one of the most influential people in the world about a topic that had been a concern of his for years. It was surreal, but as the adrenaline kicked in, he knew this wasn't just a chance to be a part of something big. It was his opportunity to help reshape an entire industry. The next morning, as John arrived at work, his mind was still buzzing from the conversation. He hadn't expected anything to come of it, but here he was, ready to dive headfirst into something that could change the future of hospitality. As he walked into the office, Derek caught his eye. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he joked. John smiled, a sense of excitement bubbling up in his chest. "You won't believe who I just spoke to." The days that followed felt like a whirlwind for John. What had started as a casual conversation with Elon Musk about the flaws in the tipping system had quickly transformed into a full-blown opportunity to help lead a revolutionary project. As the reality of it all began to set in, John couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and disbelief. This was Elon Musk, the man behind Tesla, SpaceX, and countless other groundbreaking ventures. And now, John was being invited to join him in changing the future of the hospitality industry. Over the next few days, the discussions intensified. John was sent a series of documents and proposals outlining the new tipping-free model Musk was pushing for in his restaurants. It was a bold idea, one that sought to eliminate the need for tips altogether by instituting a livable wage for all employees, without relying on customer gratuities to supplement income. The idea wasn't just about fairness for employees. It was about reshaping the entire customer experience, creating an environment where the focus was on the quality of service and food, not on who could give the biggest tip. John read through the material, absorbing the details with fascination. But as much as the concept was exciting, there was a part of him that wondered how it would actually work in practice. The restaurant industry was rooted in tradition, and tipping was a deeply embedded part of the culture, both for customers and workers. Could it really be changed? Could customers be convinced that a higher base pay for servers and staff would result in a better experience overall? One afternoon, as he sat at his kitchen table, laptop open in front of him, John's phone rang again. This time, it was Elon. "Hey, John," Elon's voice crackled through the speaker. "I've been reviewing the plan, and I think it's time we take the next step. I want to invite you to join us officially. We're looking to roll out this tipping-free model across a number of our restaurants, and I'd love for you to be a part of it. I'm talking about leading the implementation, helping to oversee the transition, and bringing your expertise to the table." John's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for, the moment he could feel the full weight of the decision he was about to make. The offer was everything he had ever dreamed of, an opportunity to work alongside one of the most innovative minds of his generation, to be part of something that could truly change the world. I don't even know what to say," John stammered, still reeling from the offer. Elon laughed, a warm sound that seemed almost reassuring. "You don't have to say anything right now, but think about it. You've got the right experience for this, John. You've been in the industry, you understand the challenges, and you're not afraid to think outside the box. I think you're exactly what we need to make this happen." John's mind raced. This was the kind of opportunity that people dreamed about, the kind of opportunity that only came once in a lifetime. But with that came a huge responsibility. This wasn't just about making changes to the way customers tipped, it was about shifting an entire industry. Could he handle it? Could he truly help Musk pull this off? "I'm honored," John said, finally finding his voice. "I won't let you down. I'll do whatever it takes." There was a pause on the line before Elon spoke again. "I knew I could count on you. We'll get the details sorted, but I want you to come out to California. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, and we need to hit the ground running." The line went quiet for a moment, and then Elon added, "And John, just so you know, you're not alone in this. We've got a team ready to back you up. You'll have all the resources you need. This is a big move, but together, I think we can pull it off." John nodded to himself, even though Elon couldn't see him. It wasn't just the promise of resources that excited him. It was the chance to be a part of something that could make a real difference. A tipping-free world might seem impossible to some, but for John, it felt like the future. The question now wasn't if this would work, it was how fast they could make it happen. The next few days were a blur. John packed up his things, prepared for his move to California, and said goodbye to his old life, at least for the time being. He had no idea where this new chapter would take him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the precipice of something monumental. When he landed in California, he was greeted by a sleek black car that whisked him away to the heart of Silicon Valley. The drive was surreal. John had been to California before, but never in this context, never as part of something this big. As the city skyline appeared on the horizon, a wave of anticipation washed over him. He had no idea what the future held, but the excitement in the air was palpable. The following morning, John arrived at Elon's headquarters, an unassuming but modern building nestled between several other tech companies. Inside, the team was already gathered. Elon greeted him with a handshake and a wide smile. "Welcome, John. We've got a lot to discuss," he said. "Let's get started." The team was a mix of tech experts, business strategists, and industry veterans, all of them eager to dive into the task at hand. John felt like a fish out of water at first, surrounded by so many sharp minds. But as the meeting progressed, he began to realize just how much he could contribute. He spoke up, offering insights from his own experience as a waiter and restaurant worker. He shared ideas about the implementation process, pointing out potential challenges and offering suggestions on how to handle them. Elon listened carefully, nodding along. "That's exactly what we need, John," he said. "Real-world experience to balance out all the theories." Over the next few weeks, John's role within the team grew clearer. He wasn't just a consultant. He was a leader in the effort to reshape the hospitality industry. Together with Elon and the rest of the team, John began to strategize, plan, and execute the rollout of the new tipping-free model. It was no easy task, and every day brought new challenges. But John was determined to make it work. As he stood in the middle of a bustling restaurant, watching the first shift of employees work under the new system, John couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This was what he had always wanted, to be part of something that wasn't just about profits, but about making a meaningful impact on people's lives. And this was only the beginning. John spent the next few weeks immersed in the planning process, collaborating with Elon and the team. Each day, they tackled a new aspect of the tipping-free initiative. The core of the project was simple: eliminate tips, offer a livable wage to all employees, and ensure that the customer experience remained high quality. But the execution was far more complicated. The first challenge was how to communicate the change to both employees and customers. It wasn't enough to just inform people about the new system. They needed to be convinced that this was the right way forward. After all, the tipping culture had been ingrained in society for generations. Could a major change like this really succeed? The team decided to launch a small-scale pilot at one of Musk's existing restaurants in Palo Alto. The restaurant had a loyal customer base, which would provide a valuable test of how well the new model would be received. John was nervous, but also exhilarated. This was the moment they would all be waiting for, the first real test of the tipping-free model. John arrived at the restaurant early that morning. The air was thick with anticipation. Elon was already there, walking through the space, speaking to staff and making sure everyone was prepared. He greeted John with a nod and a grin. "Ready for the big day?" Elon asked. John nodded, though his stomach was tight with nerves. "I think so. This is bigger than I thought it would be. Everyone is counting on this to work." Elon smiled reassuringly. "You've got this. We've planned for every scenario. Now, we just need to see how people react." The staff had been briefed about the new system in advance, and they seemed eager to see it in action. The menu had been slightly altered to reflect the price changes that accounted for the higher wages being offered. Prices were a little higher, but there was no longer a need for customers to calculate and add a tip at the end of their meal. The goal was to make the process as seamless and stress-free as possible for both employees and patrons. As the doors opened for lunch service, John watched as the first wave of customers walked in. Some of them looked a little confused at first. The restaurant's waitstaff no longer had the familiar tip jar or the telltale hint of awkwardness in their posture, unsure if they were about to be judged based on the size of a tip. Instead, They were focused on delivering the best service possible, free from the pressure of relying on gratuities. John could tell there was some hesitation among the customers. It was a new experience, and many people were unsure of what to expect. A couple of diners asked about the changes, and John was there to explain. The restaurant is now offering a fair, livable wage to all our staff, he explained to one group. The prices reflect the new compensation structure, but there's no need to leave a tip anymore. We believe in providing great service without relying on tips to make it happen. The customers seemed intrigued, and a few of them expressed their support, but others remained uncertain. John had expected this. Change was always difficult, especially when it came to something as culturally ingrained as tipping. It was going to take time for people to adapt. As the lunch service went on, John could see that the staff was a little more relaxed. They were smiling, engaging with customers without the constant distraction of worrying about tips. The focus was purely on providing an excellent experience, and the atmosphere in the restaurant was different, more authentic, less transactional. By the end of the day, the results were in. The feedback from customers had been mixed, but generally positive. Some customers loved the idea, appreciating the transparency and simplicity of the new system. They felt like the pressure of calculating tips was eliminated, allowing them to focus on enjoying the meal without worrying about how much they should leave for the server. Others, however, expressed doubts. A few patrons were uncomfortable with the new pricing structure, arguing that the prices were too high and that they preferred the old tipping model. It was clear that the transition wouldn't be easy, but it wasn't unexpected. Change always came with resistance, especially when it involved something as deeply embedded as tipping. John debriefed with Elon and the team after the first test run. Overall, I think it went well, John said, though there was a note of caution in his voice. The staff is definitely more relaxed, and I think the food and service were better because they weren't stressed about tips. But some customers are still confused, and others seem to feel like the prices are too high. I think we need to refine the messaging a bit. Elon nodded thoughtfully. That's to be expected. We're not just changing the system, we're changing the mindset. People are used to the idea of tipping, and it's going to take time for them to adjust. But we're on the right path. We just need to keep listening to feedback and make small tweaks. John agreed. The pilot had been a success in many ways, but there was still a lot of work to be done. The team made plans to review the data, tweak the pricing model, and focus on communicating the benefits of the tipping-free system more clearly. They knew that they couldn't just introduce the change and hope for the best. They had to actively guide people through the transition. The next few weeks were filled with more test runs, adjustments, and feedback sessions. The model began to take shape more clearly, and John started to see the potential for something truly transformative. The staff was more engaged, the customer experience was better, and the entire vibe of the restaurant had shifted. It was clear that this was more than just a business model, it was a movement. One afternoon, after a particularly successful test run, Elon called John into his office. "I think we're ready," Elon said. "It's time to roll this out on a larger scale." John couldn't help but smile. They were about to take the next big step toward changing the restaurant industry forever. It had been a long, challenging road, but they were finally on the verge of something huge, and John was ready to be at the forefront of it. The days following their successful test run were a blur of excitement and anticipation. The small-scale experiment had provided valuable insights, but now it was time to scale up. Elon and John had been meeting regularly, refining the messaging and fine-tuning the model. The next step was to launch the new tipping-free system in several of Musk's restaurants across the country. Elon had always been known for making bold moves, and this was no different. They were going all in, ready to disrupt the entire dining experience. The idea of tipping, long a fixture of American dining culture, was about to be challenged on a national stage. John felt the weight of the task on his shoulders. It wasn't just a business decision, it was a cultural one. He knew that, while this system could change the lives of millions of restaurant workers for the better, the process wouldn't be easy. He had seen the mixed reactions during the test run, and he understood that the rest of the country wouldn't be so eager to embrace the change. As the team prepared for the wider rollout, John found himself looking at the larger picture. The tipping culture in America was more than just a practice. It was a belief system for many people. It was about showing appreciation, rewarding good service, and maintaining an unspoken understanding between patrons and servers. The idea of completely removing tips from the equation had some customers feeling uneasy. Would they feel less generous if they weren't directly paying the server for their work? Would the employees still be motivated without the possibility of a tip at the end of the meal? For John, the answers were simple. He had seen firsthand how dependent the industry was on tips and how servers often struggled with the uncertainty that came with the system. He believed in the tipping-free model, not just because it was an idea Elon Musk was backing, but because he knew it could lead to a fairer and more sustainable industry. But getting people to buy into this new system was a challenge that couldn't be overlooked. The first restaurant in the wider rollout was in San Francisco, an ideal test market with a diverse customer base and an appreciation for progressive ideas. Elon flew in from Los Angeles to oversee the launch, and John joined him to handle the logistics and help the staff prepare. The new menu boards were up, the pricing had been adjusted to reflect the inclusion of the livable wage, and the waitstaff was ready. As the restaurant opened for the evening shift, the buzz was palpable. Customers walked in, some excited and others cautious. Many had heard about the new system, either through word of mouth or social media, but it was another thing entirely to experience it in person. John watched carefully, observing how the servers interacted with the customers. Without the pressure of constantly glancing at the tip jar or hoping for a generous gratuity, the staff seemed more relaxed and more focused on their craft. They were attentive, engaging with guests, but not in the desperate way that John remembered from his days waiting tables. As the night unfolded, there were several instances where customers asked questions about the pricing. Some were confused and asked why there was no tip line on the receipt. Others, though, were impressed and even excited about the change. One couple John spoke to share their appreciation for the model. "This is a great idea," the woman said, smiling. "We've always felt uncomfortable trying to figure out how much to tip. Sometimes it feels like we're just throwing money at the problem, you know? This way, it feels like we're actually paying for the experience, not for the chance to tip." John was encouraged by the positive feedback, but he couldn't ignore the occasional murmurs of skepticism. A few customers seemed disgruntled by the prices, particularly those who had dined at the restaurant before the new model was implemented. One man sitting near the bar muttered, "This place used to be cheaper. Now I'm paying more for the same food, but I'm not even tipping the waiter. What's the point of that?" John approached him and smiled, trying to gauge the situation without sounding defensive. "I get that. It's an adjustment for sure. But what we've done is ensure that the servers and all the staff get a consistent wage without relying on tips. The price increase reflects that. Everyone benefits." The man frowned. "I don't know. Seems like it's just a way to jack up the prices." John wanted to argue, but he could see the man's point. There was no easy way to change people's deeply ingrained habits. It was going to take time, and lots of conversations like this one. As the night went on, John was pleased to see that the staff was handling the situation with grace. When customers had questions or concerns, they didn't have to awkwardly check with the manager or try to explain why they weren't getting tipped. They had been trained to emphasize the benefits of the new system and explain that it was meant to create a better working environment for everyone. The messages were clear, and the staff was empowered to answer questions without feeling defensive. By the end of the evening, John felt optimistic, despite the mixed reactions. There were certainly some hurdles to overcome, but he could already see the potential for the tipping-free system to make a difference. The food had been served on time, the customers had left satisfied, and most importantly, the staff had worked without the stress of relying on tips. Elon met with the team afterward to discuss the feedback. John shared the positives. Many customers had praised the idea, but he also pointed out that the new prices were still a barrier for some people, especially those accustomed to the lower prices of the old system. "We've got to keep refining our approach," Elon said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "It's not just about the food or the wages. It's about shifting the mindset of the customer, too." John nodded. "Exactly. We're asking people to think differently about something they've been doing for years. It won't happen overnight, but it's going to catch on. Once they see how the system works and how it benefits everyone, it will start to feel more natural." Elon smiled. "You're right. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, but we're on the right track." The team agreed to continue refining the model and focusing on transparency in the next phase. They continue to monitor customer feedback, tweak the pricing if needed, and roll out the new system to more restaurants. The tipping-free future was within reach, but the journey was just beginning. As the new tipping-free system spread across more and more of Elon Musk's restaurants, the ripple effects began to grow. In the beginning, the change was met with cautious optimism, but as the model was adopted by more locations, it started to attract attention on a much larger scale. Some of it was positive. Many people appreciated the fairness and transparency of the new wage system, but a significant amount of negative press followed as well. It wasn't just restaurant critics who were voicing their concerns. The backlash came from all angles. Customers, particularly those who had been longtime patrons of Musk's restaurants, were expressing frustration with the change. Some complained about the increased prices, while others had simply never been comfortable with the idea of dining without the ability to leave a tip. For many, tipping was a deeply ingrained part of the dining experience, and they didn't know how to navigate a meal without it. Social media was ablaze with heated debates. On Twitter, hashtags like #TippingRevolution and #SayNoToNoTips began trending, with a mix of support and criticism. One tweet from a popular restaurant critic read, "Elon Musk's tipping-free restaurants, a utopian idea for the 1%, but for most of us, it's just a way to make dining more expensive. Not all progress is progress." The tweet was shared thousands of times, and the responses were mixed. Some agreed with the critic, while others praised Musk for trying to innovate in an outdated system. But the most vocal response came from servers themselves. Many longtime waitstaff, some of whom had worked in the industry for decades, expressed concerns about the tipping-free model. They worried that the base wages being offered wouldn't be enough to make up for the loss of tips, and that the new pricing would lead to fewer customers, further jeopardizing their earnings. John sat in a conference room with Elon and the team, watching the news reports and social media responses unfold on the large screen in front of them. The room was tense, and for the first time since the project began, John felt a sense of doubt creeping in. "This is bigger than I thought," John said, rubbing his forehead. "People are genuinely upset. It's not just about the money, it's about tradition. People don't like having their habits challenged." Elon, however, didn't seem shaken. He leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. "Of course, it's going to be controversial. Change is always difficult. But we've already seen that the tipping system is broken. Servers are depending on the whims of customers to determine their wages. And don't forget, we've made sure that the wage increase compensates for the lack of tips. The numbers don't lie." John nodded, but wasn't entirely convinced. The numbers might make sense in theory, but what about the people who don't see the bigger picture? What about the ones who think they'll be paying more for less? Or the ones who think we're just out to make more money at their expense? Elon smiled slightly. "We're not out to make more money at their expense, John. We're trying to make the whole system more fair. But we have to expect some resistance. It's human nature." The team spent the next few hours brainstorming ways to address the backlash. They needed a way to reassure customers and employees that this was a long-term solution, not just a short-term experiment. There was a need for better communication, both with customers and with employees who still felt uncertain about the shift. "We need to be transparent," John said. "We can't just throw the system out there and hope it works. People need to see the evidence that this will benefit them. We need to show them the impact, not just in terms of wages, but also in how the overall experience improves." Elon nodded. "You're right. We'll create a public campaign. We'll show people the numbers, the real impact on the workers, and how this can transform the industry." Over the next few weeks, the team launched a major public relations campaign aimed at educating the public about the tipping-free model. They released detailed reports showing how the new pay structure benefited employees, illustrating how servers were making a fair, consistent income without the variability of tips. The campaign also highlighted how the quality of service had improved, with waitstaff feeling less stressed and more motivated to provide excellent service since they no longer had to rely on tips for their livelihood. They also held several town hall-style meetings with employees at various locations, offering them the opportunity to voice their concerns directly. Many were hesitant at first, but the more they heard about the logic behind the model, the more they began to warm to it. Some employees shared stories about how they had worked for years in restaurants, surviving on tips that fluctuated wildly from day to day. For them, the tipping-free system seemed like a breath of fresh air. However, not everyone was convinced. As the campaign progressed, the criticism didn't die down. In fact, it seemed to only grow louder. A high-profile diner at one of Musk's flagship restaurants published an op-ed in a well-known magazine, arguing that the tipping system was what kept servers motivated to provide great service. Without tips, the writer claimed, servers would lose their incentive to work hard. I've eaten at dozens of restaurants where the service was great because I knew the server was working for their tip, the op-ed read. But with this new system, how do we know the servers will still give it their all? I've seen so many places where the service becomes complacent once tips are eliminated. If I'm paying more for my meal, I want to be sure I'm getting the best service. John read the op-ed with a growing sense of frustration. He knew that people still didn't fully understand what they were trying to achieve. The tipping culture had always been a reward for good service, but now the goal was to create an environment where service was consistently good, regardless of a tip. As the debate raged on, John received a call from Elon late one evening. "John," Elon's voice crackled through the phone, "we need to take the campaign to the next level. It's time to have a real conversation about the future of the tipping system, and we need you to be the face of it. You've been on the front lines, and you know the issues better than anyone. It's time for you to address the concerns head-on." John was taken aback. "You want me to go public with this? I mean, it's one thing to manage the logistics, but going on TV and giving interviews, that's a whole new ballgame." Elon's tone was calm but insistent. "Yes, exactly. You have the experience. You've been in the trenches. And the public needs to see that this is about fairness, not just business. If anyone can make the case for this, it's you." John hesitated. It was a huge responsibility. But then he remembered why he had gotten involved in the first place. To change the way things worked, to make the restaurant industry fairer, and to stand up for the workers who had always been at the mercy of an outdated system. "All right," John said finally. "I'll do it." The decision to become the public face of the tipping-free movement was one that John didn't take lightly. As he stood in front of the cameras, preparing for his first national interview, he couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and anxiety. He knew that this wasn't just a media opportunity, it was a chance to change an entire industry. But with that responsibility came the weight of the backlash. The media storm surrounding the tipping-free initiative had only grown stronger. The public was divided. Supporters praised Elon Musk for challenging the status quo and fighting for workers' rights, while opponents argued that the move was a publicity stunt that disregarded the hard-earned tips of servers and diners' ability to show gratitude. John sat across from a seasoned interviewer in a sleek, modern studio, lights glaring down on him as the cameras rolled. He had been rehearsing for hours, but now that the moment had arrived, he felt like he was in the hot seat. "Welcome, John," the interviewer said, her smile warm, but her tone sharp. "You've become the face of Elon Musk's controversial tipping-free initiative, and the response has been mixed, to say the least. There's been widespread backlash, with many customers and critics arguing that this could undermine the quality of service in restaurants. What's your response to that?" John took a deep breath, his nerves visible in the way his fingers lightly tapped the edge of his chair. "I understand the concerns," he said, his voice steady but firm. "Tipping has been a long-standing part of American dining culture, and it's hard for many to imagine a world without it. But what we're doing is offering a solution that's fairer for everyone, staff and customers alike." The interviewer raised an eyebrow. "But some argue that if you remove tips, servers will have no incentive to give great service. How do you address that?" John leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers. "That's the key point. We're not taking away the incentive to provide great service. In fact, we're creating a stronger incentive, a consistent, livable wage. No more worrying about whether or not your tip will be enough to cover your bills. No more stress for employees or customers. What we're doing is giving servers the peace of mind to focus on their craft, not on how much their customers are tipping." The interviewer nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I've seen some feedback that customers believe the prices at your restaurants have increased unfairly. How do you justify the price hikes?" John's response was immediate. "The price increase reflects the new compensation structure, and we've been very transparent about that. We're not hiding anything. We're offering higher wages for all staff members, wages that reflect the hard work they do every day. And by eliminating tips, We're allowing diners to know exactly what they're paying up front, with no surprises at the end of the meal. The interviewer paused, letting the information sink in before posing her next question. But isn't there a concern that, by removing the ability for customers to express appreciation directly through tips, you're taking away a piece of the dining experience? For many diners, tipping is a way to personally connect with the service they received. John nodded thoughtfully. I get that. Tipping is personal. It's a way of showing appreciation for great service. But our approach is about showing appreciation in a different way. We want to create a system where employees are respected for their work and where the focus is on providing consistent, high-quality service across the board, not based on whether or not the customer can afford to leave a generous tip. The interviewer then shifted gears, asking a question that was on everyone's mind. What about the critics who say this is all a big experiment, one that won't work in the long term? What if this model fails and customers return to the old system? John's heart rate quickened as he considered the weight of the question. But he knew that this was exactly the kind of challenge he had signed up for when he agreed to be part of the tipping-free initiative. He took a deep breath before answering. I don't think it's an experiment. It's a solution to a real problem. And if we truly care about the people who serve us food, then we need to start thinking about a system that works for them, not just the customers. This isn't about one meal or one restaurant. It's about rethinking the entire industry. Will it be easy? No, but the change is already happening. It's happening because we've seen firsthand how the tipping system can hurt workers and perpetuate inequality. And that's a system that needs to change. The interviewer seemed impressed. You're confident that this is the future of dining? I am, John said, his voice unwavering. This model is about fairness, about respect for the people who make dining out possible. The tipping system has its flaws. And while it may take time to adjust, I believe that in the end, customers and workers alike will realize that a fair wage, a consistent price, and a better dining experience are worth the change. As the interview wrapped up, John left the studio feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. The pressure had been intense, but he felt good about the message he had delivered. He knew that the backlash wasn't going to disappear overnight, but he had a sense that they were on the right track. The next few days were filled with more interviews, debates, and discussions. The media circus continued to swirl around the tipping-free model, with Elon Musk standing firmly behind the initiative. Public opinion remained divided, but there was an undeniable shift in the conversation. More and more people were engaging with the idea, questioning the old model, and considering alternatives. In one particularly tense interview on a popular news show, the anchor asked, "Is this just about making restaurants more expensive? Or is there a deeper reason behind Elon Musk's push to remove tipping from the equation?" Elon's answer was clear and direct. It's about fairness. It's about sustainability. And it's about giving people the dignity they deserve in their work. Tipping has always been a system that put employees at the mercy of the customer's generosity. That's not fair, and it's not sustainable. Our model is built on fairness, consistency, and respect for workers. The anchors were taken aback, but Elon's calm, confident demeanor only seemed to strengthen his case. And with each interview, the message became clearer. John watched from the sidelines, feeling more convinced than ever that they were on the cusp of something monumental. The backlash was expected, but the momentum was building. People were starting to listen, and more importantly, they were starting to understand. The whirlwind of interviews, debates, and media attention was taking its toll on John. It had only been a few weeks since he'd agreed to step into the public eye, but already, he felt like he'd aged years. It wasn't the intense scrutiny that bothered him. It was the responsibility. He had become the spokesperson for an idea that had the potential to change an entire industry, but he had also become the target of countless critics who didn't see the vision. That night, as he walked out of another heated interview, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. A small group of waitstaff from one of Musk's restaurants, holding up signs in protest. They were calling for the reinstatement of tipping, arguing that the new wage system wasn't enough to cover their needs. They were upset, frustrated by the changes, feeling unheard and uncertain about the future. John's stomach dropped. He had expected some resistance from customers, but seeing the employees who were supposed to benefit from this change standing on the other side of the line was harder than he had imagined. "John," a familiar voice called out from behind him. He turned to see Rachel, one of the servers from the flagship restaurant, walking toward him, her face serious but not unfriendly. "Rachel, hey," John said, trying to keep his tone neutral. "What's going on here?" Rachel stopped in front of him, glancing briefly at the protesters before locking eyes with him. "We need to talk. This isn't working. Some of us aren't making the money we used to, and there's no guarantee that the new wage will cover everything. You know how it is. Tips were unpredictable, but they were also an opportunity to earn more. This new system doesn't feel like a solution. It feels like a step backward." John felt his heart tighten. He had known this conversation was coming, but hearing it from Rachel, someone he respected, made it hit home. "I get it," John said, his voice softening. "The transition isn't easy. It's going to take time, and it's not perfect. But trust me, we're doing this to make things better in the long run. I promise you, the goal is to make your lives more stable, not less." Rachel shook her head, frustration evident in her expression. "Stable, yes, but I don't feel like I'm getting the respect I deserve. I can't just survive on a base wage alone. I need to see the impact, John. I need to see the money. Otherwise, I'm out." The words hit John hard. Rachel wasn't just expressing concern. She was considering leaving, and he knew that if more employees started feeling the same way, the whole initiative could fall apart. This was a tipping point, and it wasn't just about changing the way customers dined. It was about making sure the people on the ground, the servers, the bartenders, the hosts, felt supported and heard. "I'll talk to Elon," John said, determined. "We'll figure out a way to make it right." Rachel gave him a tight-lipped nod. "I hope so, because I can't keep working under these conditions." Later that night, John met with Elon in one of the quieter corners of one of the restaurants, away from the prying eyes of the staff and media. He could tell from Elon's expression that the concerns Rachel had raised weren't new to him. "Elon," John began, his voice firm, "we need to make some changes. We're getting pushback from our staff now. They're not seeing the impact of the wage increase in the way they expected. And to be honest, the tipping-free model is starting to feel like it's more about the business than the people it's meant to support." Elon didn't respond right away. He stared out at the restaurant floor, where patrons were enjoying their meals, unaware of the growing tensions behind the scenes. Finally, Elon spoke, his voice calm but deliberate. "I knew this wouldn't be easy, but the goal was always to get to a point where employees didn't have to rely on tips. They were making good money before, but it was inconsistent. And as much as I wanted to push for fairness, I also didn't want to alienate anyone in the process." John looked at him, frustration creeping into his voice. "Well, it's happening. We're alienating the very people we need to make this work. I don't think they understand the bigger picture. They're seeing the paychecks, but not feeling the improvement. And they need to see it, Elon. They need to feel it." Elon nodded slowly, as if processing what John was saying. After a moment, he looked back at him. "Okay, I hear you. Let's adjust. We can't lose sight of the fact that this is about the workers. We need to make sure they feel the difference, not just on paper, but in their everyday lives." John felt a small sense of relief. Finally, they were on the same page. "We can also communicate better with the team. If they see how the new system is really going to benefit them, they might be more willing to buy in." Elon leaned forward, his eyes glinting with resolve. "Let's do it. We'll make adjustments to the compensation package and increase the base pay where needed. We'll also implement more transparency about how the money is being distributed. And we'll have a meeting with the employees to get their feedback directly." John felt a weight lift off his shoulders. This wasn't the end of the challenge, but it was a step in the right direction. The next few days were spent fine-tuning the changes. Elon and the team worked tirelessly, revising the pay structure to ensure that servers would receive a wage they could depend on, without sacrificing the quality of service. They increased the hourly wage for many of the staff and introduced a performance-based bonus system, so employees could still earn extra based on customer satisfaction and other factors. But just as important was the communication strategy. John worked with the PR team to set up a series of town halls where employees could ask questions, express concerns, and get a clearer understanding of the changes. It was crucial to rebuild trust and show the staff that their voices mattered. As the meetings rolled out across the restaurants, John saw the mood begin to shift. There were still skeptics, But many of the employees began to understand the long-term vision. They could see the improvements in their paychecks, and more importantly, they could see that the company was genuinely listening to them. Rachel came up to John after one of the town hall meetings, a hesitant but hopeful look on her face. "You were right," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "I can see what you're trying to do now. I just needed to know that you cared about us, not just the system." John smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment. "I do care. We all do. This is a team effort." The weeks that followed John and Elon's meeting were pivotal. The changes to the pay structure were implemented gradually, and a renewed sense of energy started to ripple through the staff. It was clear that things weren't perfect. There were still mixed feelings about the tipping-free model, but there was a palpable shift in atmosphere. Employees were talking openly about the changes, their concerns addressed, and for the first time in a while, many were beginning to believe in the vision that had once seemed so distant. John couldn't help but notice the difference during his daily visits to the restaurant. The staff seemed less stressed, more focused on providing exceptional service instead of wondering if their tips would cover their rent. The tension that had once filled the air was replaced by something different: hope. One evening, after the dinner rush had slowed down, John found himself sitting with Rachel again. They were in a quiet corner of the restaurant, the noise of clinking dishes and laughter from the bar in the background, a stark contrast to the serious conversation they were about to have. "Thanks for giving us a chance to speak up, John," Rachel said, her eyes reflecting the change in her tone. "I wasn't sure where this whole thing was going, but I'm starting to believe it might actually work." John smiled, but there was still a hint of concern in his eyes. "I'm glad to hear that, Rachel, but I know there's still a long way to go. We've made adjustments, but it's going to take time for people to fully buy into this. I don't want anyone to feel like they're being left behind." Rachel nodded. "I get that, but I think the key is that you're listening. That's the part that matters most. A lot of people didn't feel like anyone cared before, like we were just part of the system, not the heart of it. You're changing that, and it feels better, you know?" John looked out the window for a moment, contemplating her words. She was right. It wasn't just about the financial adjustments. It was about showing the team that they mattered, that their voices counted. That was the real turning point. Just then, Elon walked in, his usual confident stride cutting through the buzz of the restaurant. He looked around the dining room with a critical eye, but when he saw John and Rachel, his face softened. "How's it going?" Elon asked, taking a seat at the table. "It's going well," John replied. "People are starting to come around. It's not perfect, but the adjustments are making a difference." Elon smiled. "That's good to hear. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but sometimes you have to push through the discomfort to get to the real change." Rachel spoke up. "I agree. I still have some concerns, but I see the bigger picture now. It's not just about surviving, it's about thriving. We're all in this together, and I think we can make it work." Elon gave a small nod, clearly pleased. "That's what I want to hear. We're not just changing the way people tip, we're changing the way people think about work in this industry. And it's going to take all of us to make that happen." The next few months were a blur of progress. The restaurant continued to implement the new wage structure, and while some hiccups remained, the overall effect was undeniable. Employee morale was higher than it had been in years, and customers seemed more satisfied with their meals, knowing exactly what they were paying for and not worrying about how much to tip. For John, the work wasn't over. He continued to monitor the changes, visiting restaurants regularly, talking with employees, and collecting feedback. He understood that this was a long-term project, not just a quick fix. But with every passing day, the tipping-free system seemed to become more and more viable. One evening, John and Elon sat down for a dinner in one of the newly renovated restaurants. The atmosphere was different, calmer, more relaxed. The restaurant was buzzing with conversation, but there was no tension in the air. It felt like a normal dining experience, something John hadn't realized he'd been missing until now. "This feels different," John remarked as he looked around the room. "People are happy. The staff, the customers, they're all here for the right reasons." Elon took a sip of his drink and leaned back in his chair. "It's a start, but we're just getting started. The tipping system isn't just about the financial transaction. It's about respect, dignity, and equality. If we can prove that this model works, will set a new standard for the entire industry. John smiled, feeling a sense of pride wash over him. You're right. We're not just changing the rules, we're rewriting them. But the tipping-free movement didn't just stay contained within the walls of Musk's restaurants. Word began to spread. Articles started popping up in major publications, praising the initiative as a bold step forward for the restaurant industry. Critics who had once lambasted Elon and John for their audacity were now slowly starting to come around, acknowledging the benefits of the system. Then came the first major test. A rival restaurant chain, known for its upscale dining experience, decided to adopt a similar model, no tips, just a higher base wage for employees. They were taking the same approach, citing the success of Musk's restaurants as evidence that the tipping-free system could thrive on a larger scale. John was both thrilled and nervous. The competition meant that the movement was gaining traction, but it also meant that the spotlight would be even brighter. If the tipping-free model could succeed in multiple restaurants, it would prove that this wasn't just a gimmick, it was the future. As John and Elon watched the story unfold, they both knew that the tipping-free system was on the verge of something much bigger than either of them had anticipated. It wasn't just changing the way people dined, it was shifting the entire culture of the restaurant industry. They had ignited a revolution, and there was no turning back. It was a cold evening in late autumn when John received the call that would change everything. It had been a typical day, filled with meetings, strategy sessions, and visits to restaurants across the city, but the news on the other end of the line was anything but typical. "Elon's on the line for you," the receptionist said. John quickly made his way to the office and picked up the phone, sensing that something major was happening. "John, I've been following the results, and we need to talk." Elon's voice crackled through the receiver. His tone was serious, but there was a trace of excitement beneath it. "Okay, I'm listening," John replied, sitting down at his desk, bracing for what was coming. "I've been getting calls from some of the biggest restaurant chains in the country," Elon said, his voice gaining momentum. "They're all interested in adopting the tipping-free model. We've sparked a trend. This isn't just a local thing anymore. This is national." John's heart skipped a beat. He had known the tipping-free system was gaining traction, but hearing Elon's words put it into an entirely new perspective. "That's incredible," John said, his mind racing. "How serious are they about it? Are they ready to make the switch?" "Serious enough to want to meet," Elon replied. "I've already set up meetings with some of the biggest names in the industry. They want to see how we did it, how we made it work, and how they can implement the same thing in their own chains." John leaned back in his chair, his mind buzzing with the possibilities. The tipping-free movement was no longer just a small experiment. It was becoming a movement, one that was capable of changing the entire landscape of the restaurant industry. "We need to be ready for this," John said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts racing through his mind. "This is the moment we've been waiting for." The meetings came fast and furious in the days that followed. John and Elon found themselves sitting in boardrooms with the executives of some of the largest restaurant chains in the country. From casual dining to fine dining, every type of establishment was now looking at the tipping-free model with new eyes. John had anticipated some skepticism, but the questions were surprisingly insightful. The restaurant owners and CEOs were interested in the logistics of the transition, the financial stability of the model, and most importantly, the long-term sustainability. They all saw the potential for change, but each was looking for the reassurance that it wouldn't be a flash-in-the-pan trend. "This isn't just about eliminating tips," John explained to a room full of executives. "It's about creating a better work environment, a more stable income for employees, and a more transparent experience for customers. People want to know what they're paying for. They want to feel that the money they're spending goes directly to the people who are serving them." One of the executives, the CEO of a popular upscale chain, raised an eyebrow. "But the tipping culture is deeply ingrained in the American dining experience. How do we convince our customers that this is the better way?" John smiled, knowing the answer was coming from his own experiences. "We don't force it. We educate them. We show them how it works. We make it about the experience, not just the transaction. And most importantly, we make sure that our employees feel valued. When they see their staff thriving, customers will follow." Elon, who had been quiet for much of the meeting, spoke up. "The key is transparency. We've built a model that doesn't just shift the financial burden from the customer to the restaurant. It's a new system that's built on fairness. If we can prove that this works in our restaurants, we can prove it works on a larger scale. As the weeks passed, John and Elon worked tirelessly with the restaurant chains, helping them to adapt the tipping-free model to their own businesses. The logistics were more complex than they had anticipated, but John felt a sense of pride with every successful meeting. The restaurant industry was changing, and they were leading the charge. The first major chain to announce its adoption of the tipping-free system was a well-known mid-range chain that had been struggling with inconsistent employee satisfaction and high turnover rates. The company's CEO, once skeptical of the system, had finally been convinced that it was a better way forward. The announcement came with a wave of publicity. Media outlets praised the restaurant for taking a bold step into the future, and many dining experts began to speculate about the ripple effect this could have on the rest of the industry. The tipping-free model was no longer a novelty. It was a viable alternative to the traditional structure. But as the movement spread, not everyone was happy about it. Long-standing critics, including industry veterans who had built their reputations on the traditional model, began to speak out. Some argued that the tipping system was essential for creating a competitive and rewarding environment for employees, while others claimed that customers would never accept a world without tipping. John had been expecting this backlash, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. The critics were vocal, and their influence in the industry was undeniable. They made their case through op-eds, interviews, and even protests at some of the restaurants that had adopted the new model. But John remained undeterred. He knew that this was the price of progress. In one particularly heated interview with a well-known food critic, John was asked about the long-term viability of the tipping-free system. The critic, who had made a career out of supporting the traditional tipping model, challenged John's vision. "So, you honestly believe that eliminating tips will improve the restaurant industry?" the critic asked, a smirk playing at the edge of his lips. "Don't you think you're just catering to a trend?" John's response was calm but firm. "This isn't a trend. It's a necessary evolution. Tipping has created an environment of inequality in the service industry for far too long. What we're doing is giving servers and workers a predictable, fair wage. It's time for change, and I'm confident that the tipping-free model is part of that change." The critic wasn't satisfied with the answer, but John could see the shift in the conversation. The more he spoke about the systemic issues that had plagued the industry, the more the critics started to listen. Not all of them, but enough to make a difference. As the year drew to a close, John and Elon sat in their office, watching as the tipping-free movement continued to unfold before them. They had faced resistance, challenges, and even personal doubts. But with each passing day, the tipping-free model was becoming more and more of a reality. "It's happening," Elon said quietly, watching the news reports roll in. "We're on the brink of something huge." John nodded, a sense of satisfaction settling over him. "We are. And it's just the beginning." As the tipping-free model gained more ground, John and Elon started to feel the weight of the movement they had begun. They had proven the concept in their own restaurants, and now, with several high-profile chains jumping on board, it seemed like a tidal wave of change was about to crash over the restaurant industry. But like any revolution, there was opposition, and not just from the critics in the media. One afternoon, as John sat at his desk reviewing the latest round of feedback from new restaurant partners, he received a call that made his heart race. "John, it's Rachel," the voice on the other end said. Rachel's tone was urgent, almost frantic. "You need to come down to the restaurant. Something's not right." John's stomach tightened. "What's going on?" "There's been a protest. Some of the staff are upset with the changes. They're questioning the tipping-free model, and some are even thinking about quitting," Rachel said, her words tumbling out quickly. John felt a knot form in his chest. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Hang tight." He hung up and immediately grabbed his coat, his mind racing with possibilities. Rachel had been one of the biggest supporters of the tipping-free system, and to hear that some of the staff were considering quitting was a blow he hadn't anticipated. He couldn't afford to lose momentum now, not when they were so close to creating lasting change. When John arrived at the restaurant, he was greeted by the sight of a few staff members standing outside, holding signs that read, "Tips equals fair wages," and "Don't take away our power." The protest was small, but the intensity in the air was palpable. Inside, Rachel was speaking with a few of the waitstaff, trying to keep things calm. But John could tell from the look on her face that the situation was fragile. "Rachel," John called out, making his way through the restaurant. She turned to him, her expression a mixture of frustration and concern. "We didn't see this coming. Some of the employees are worried that they'll be worse off without tips. They feel like their hard work is being undervalued." John took a deep breath, walking over to the staff members who had gathered near the protest. He understood their concerns. They had always been a part of the tipping culture, and the idea of being paid the same regardless of their hustle was hard to accept for some. But he also knew that the system they had created was meant to address exactly this fear. "Hey, everyone," John said, his voice calm but firm. "I understand that you're frustrated, but I want to talk through this with you." One of the waiters, a young man named Alex, stepped forward, his arms crossed. "What's there to talk about? You're taking away our tips, man. That's how we make our money. Without that, we're just getting the same wage as everyone else. We're losing what made this job worth doing." John looked around at the others, who nodded in agreement. They were scared, and understandably so. This wasn't just about a paycheck. This was about their livelihoods, their identities. "I get it," John said, taking a step closer. "And that's exactly why we're doing this. The tipping system has created a culture where employees are dependent on the generosity of others. You guys work hard, and you deserve more than the uncertainty of whether or not someone will leave a big tip. That's what the new system is designed to change." "But how do you know this is going to work?" Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We've been telling them that things will get better, but they don't see it. They feel like they're being left behind." John paused, his eyes scanning the room. He knew this wasn't just a conversation about money. It was about trust, about convincing the staff that this was the right thing for them in the long run. "It's not going to happen overnight," John said finally. "There will be bumps along the way. But I promise you, this system is designed to make your lives easier. It's about fairness and stability. You won't have to rely on tips anymore. Your paycheck will be consistent, and that means you can plan, you can save, and you can focus on what really matters, providing excellent service, day in and day out." The room was quiet, but the staff members seemed to be listening. John continued, speaking from the heart. "We're not here to take something away from you. We're here to give you a foundation, a steady foundation. Trust me, I know this isn't easy, but this is the future of the industry." Rachel stepped forward, placing a hand on John's arm. "Look, I know change is hard, but we're all in this together. I've seen the impact the tipping-free model has had here, and I believe it can work for all of us." There was a long pause, the tension hanging in the air. Then, Alex, the young waiter who had spoken earlier, sighed. "I just don't know, man," he said, his voice softer now. "I've been doing this job for years, and tipping was always a way to measure how well I did. Without it, it just feels, I don't know, like we're just workers, not partners." John nodded thoughtfully. "I get that, Alex. But think of it this way. You're more than just someone who takes orders and brings food. You're an essential part of the experience here. And that's what we're valuing. We're not taking away your power. We're giving you a new kind of respect. A steady paycheck means you don't have to worry about being judged based on the whims of a customer's mood. You're getting paid what you're worth, no matter what." The others seemed to be listening, their expressions slowly softening. After a long silence, Alex spoke again. "All right, I get where you're coming from, but I think we need to see it in action. If this is going to work, we need to feel the difference. We need to see that this really works for us." John's heart lifted slightly. He knew this was a turning point. "I promise you, we'll make it work. We'll work through the issues together, and we'll keep you updated every step of the way. But we have to start believing in it, in each other." As the protest wound down, the staff reluctantly returned to their duties. It hadn't been a victory, but it was progress. John knew that some of the hardest battles were still ahead. But if the tipping-free model was going to survive, it needed to pass its first real test, the trust of the very people it was designed to help. Back in his office, John sat at his desk, looking at the feedback from the meeting. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be smooth, but he also knew that every revolution had its growing pains. The tipping-free movement wasn't just about changing how people paid for their food. It was about changing the way society viewed work, value, and fairness. And that, John thought, was worth fighting for. The weeks after the protest were tense, but the tipping-free model continued to roll out across various restaurant chains. John and Elon were fully immersed in the movement's expansion, pushing forward with confidence despite the growing pains. John had learned that change, no matter how beneficial, was never easy. It was always met with resistance, sometimes even from those who stood to benefit the most. But things were starting to turn around. As the media continued to report on the tipping-free initiative, a surprising shift occurred. Customers, who had once been skeptical of the idea, began to embrace it. More and more diners were praising the transparency and the new experience of knowing exactly what they were paying for. They appreciated that the service charge was now incorporated into the menu prices, and there were no longer awkward moments of figuring out tips at the end of the meal. For the first time in a long while, they were able to enjoy their meals without wondering whether their server would be compensated fairly. But as customer sentiment improved, the conversation around the tipping-free movement began to change in the media. Instead of focusing solely on the logistical aspects, the media began to shine a light on the human side of the story, the experiences of the workers, their hopes, and their struggles. One afternoon, John sat down to lunch with Rachel, who had become more than just a manager at the restaurant. She was a true advocate for the tipping-free model, and her support had become crucial in keeping things on track. "So, what's the latest?" Rachel asked, as she took a sip of her iced tea. John smiled as he set down the menu. "Well, the media is finally starting to catch on to the bigger picture. They're focusing more on how the tipping-free system is improving worker satisfaction. We're starting to see more support from restaurant staff in other cities, too." "That's good to hear," Rachel said, nodding. "But we're still dealing with some pushback. The employees at some of the other restaurants are still skeptical. They feel like this is all happening too fast. They're not used to such radical change." "I get it," John said, leaning back in his chair. "It's a huge shift. But the fact that the customers are embracing it, that means we're on the right track. Now, we just need to keep reassuring the staff that this is better for them in the long run." Rachel looked thoughtful. "But that's just it. They don't see the long-term benefits yet. The immediate payoff, the tips, is what they're used to. They want to feel like their hustle is getting rewarded right away." John nodded. "And that's the hardest part. Changing the mindset takes time. But the truth is, we're building something more sustainable. It's not about short-term rewards. It's about stability and security for everyone." As their conversation continued, John's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen. It was Elon. "Excuse me for a second," John said, answering the call. "Hey, Elon, what's up?" "I need you to sit down for this," Elon said, his voice unusually serious. "We've just been approached by one of the largest food service conglomerates in the country. They want to adopt the tipping-free model across all of their brands." John's heart raced. "Wait, are you serious?" "Absolutely. They're on board with everything. They're ready to roll it out nationwide," Elon continued. "This is it, John. This is the moment we've been waiting for." John could hardly believe it. The tipping-free model was about to go national. He quickly excused himself from the table and stepped outside to process the news. As he stood there, his mind raced with the implications. This wasn't just about one restaurant or one chain anymore. It was a revolution, and it was spreading faster than he could have imagined. The next few days were a whirlwind. John and Elon met with representatives from the food service conglomerate, a group so large it owned over 50 different restaurant brands. The conversation was both thrilling and overwhelming. The executives were excited about the model, but they wanted assurances that it would work on a larger scale. "We need to know that this will be financially viable for all of our restaurants," one of the executives said, her tone measured. "How can you guarantee that this won't hurt the bottom line?" John, feeling the pressure but resolute, laid out the numbers. "We've already proven that the model works in smaller settings. We've seen improved employee satisfaction, lower turnover rates, and a more predictable revenue stream for the restaurant. This system reduces the need for complex tip structures, minimizes administrative costs, and increases transparency with customers. It's a win-win." Elon added, "The tipping system has always been a kind of mystery. Customers don't know how much they're actually paying in tips, and servers don't always get what they deserve. This system is a more honest and efficient way to operate. The executives seemed intrigued, but they were still cautious. They had to consider the potential fallout, not only from customers, but also from employees who had built their careers around the traditional tipping system. "You're talking about changing the way people have been dining out for generations," another executive said. "There's bound to be resistance." "I know," John said, acknowledging the challenge. "But we're already seeing positive feedback from both customers and workers. The tipping-free system is gaining momentum. It's the future of the restaurant industry." The meeting continued for several hours, but by the end, the conglomerate's executives were sold. They agreed to start implementing the tipping-free model across their brands, with a pilot program launching in several key markets. As the days passed, John couldn't help but feel the weight of what they had just accomplished. The tipping-free model was no longer just a dream. It was a reality on the brink of being adopted on a national scale. But with this success came new challenges. The eyes of the entire industry were on them now, and the pressure to succeed was greater than ever. Back at the restaurant, John spoke to the staff about the new developments. They had been through a lot over the past few months, and he knew this news would be a game-changer for them. "I know this hasn't been easy," John began, standing before the group, "but I need you to know that what we're doing here is bigger than just us. We're part of a movement that's changing the entire restaurant industry. This tipping-free system is going national. We've got the backing of some of the largest restaurant groups in the country. This is going to make a huge difference." The staff looked stunned but hopeful. For the first time in a long while, they seemed to believe in the vision. "We're not just waiting for tips anymore," John continued. "We're creating a future where every worker gets what they deserve, no matter what. And it all starts right here with you." As the restaurant buzzed with renewed energy, John felt a sense of pride and excitement. They had made it through the toughest moments, and now, with the tipping-free model poised to go national, the real work was about to begin. It was a new era for the restaurant industry, one that promised fairness, transparency, and, most importantly, stability. John stepped outside, taking a deep breath of the cool evening air. The road ahead wouldn't be without its challenges, but for the first time in months, he felt a sense of calm. They had started something big, and they weren't going to stop until it had changed the world. The excitement of the deal with the food service conglomerate hadn't worn off, but the reality of managing such a massive transition had quickly set in. The tipping-free model was about to be rolled out across hundreds of restaurants nationwide, and John and Elon knew that success wasn't guaranteed. They had come so far, but this next step would be the ultimate test of whether their vision could scale. John found himself busier than ever, coordinating with executives, restaurants, and managers across the country. He and Elon were on back-to-back calls, handling logistics, discussing marketing strategies, and addressing concerns from staff. It wasn't just about implementing the new system. It was about convincing everyone, from restaurant employees to customers, that this was the right move. One evening, as John sat at his desk, sipping his cold coffee, Elon called him. It had been a long day, and John could hear the exhaustion in his voice. "You good?" Elon asked, his tone casual but with a hint of concern. "I'm hanging in there," John replied, rubbing his eyes. "This is bigger than I thought. The rollout's starting next week, and I'm starting to realize just how many moving parts there are in this thing." "I know. I've been feeling the pressure too," Elon said, his voice still calm, though there was a trace of tension. "But we've made it this far, right? We just need to keep pushing. This is our chance to change the industry forever." John nodded, even though Elon couldn't see him. "You're right. We've got the momentum. I just hope everyone's ready for this. There's going to be resistance, and I want to make sure we handle it the right way." "Yeah," Elon said thoughtfully. "I think it's time we take a step back and really show people what we're doing here. It's not just about food prices, it's about fairness. We need to make sure the public gets that." "Exactly. It's about giving workers a stable, predictable wage. It's about fairness in the workplace. It's time we make that the narrative," John agreed. The two of them spoke for another hour, planning their next steps. They decided it was time for a nationwide marketing campaign, a full-on blitz that would educate consumers and restaurant workers alike about the tipping-free model's benefits. They wanted to reach as many people as possible, especially those who might be skeptical. The days leading up to the national rollout were a blur. The marketing materials came together quickly, showcasing the new model with clean, bold messaging, fair pay for all, no tips, no hidden fees. John and Elon knew they had to make the message simple and direct. This wasn't just about convenience. It was about changing the way people thought about work and compensation. On the day of the official launch, the first wave of restaurants implemented the tipping-free model. From New York to Los Angeles, the restaurants updated their menus and started educating their customers. Staff members wore new uniforms with the slogan prominently displayed, and the buzz surrounding the change was palpable. But even as the restaurants opened their doors, John and Elon knew the true test was still ahead. The media had already latched onto the story, and it was quickly becoming one of the most talked-about changes in the restaurant industry. Some outlets praised the move as a much-needed disruption to a broken system. Others warned of the potential backlash from customers and employees who weren't ready for such a radical shift. In a press conference that morning, John addressed the concerns head-on. "We understand that change isn't always easy," he said, standing before a room full of reporters. "But we believe in a system that values workers, that gives them the respect they deserve. The tipping-free model isn't about making things harder for customers. It's about creating fairness, transparency, and stability for everyone. This is the future of dining." The questions came fast. What about customer satisfaction? What happens if they don't feel like the service was worth the price? John took a deep breath before answering. It's not about a single meal or a single customer's experience. It's about ensuring that every worker is fairly compensated for their time and effort. If a customer doesn't feel satisfied, the service charge doesn't change. What changes is the knowledge that the worker is paid consistently, no matter what. Another reporter asked, "What do you say to the critics who claim this model will drive up prices and hurt small businesses?" John looked around the room, feeling the weight of the question. It's true that the pricing structure will look different, but we've done the math, and we believe it will ultimately reduce overhead costs for businesses. It's about eliminating the uncertainty of tips and providing workers with predictable paychecks. It's an investment in the future of our industry. As the first few days of the rollout passed, John felt a sense of cautious optimism. The restaurants were packed with curious customers, eager to experience the new model. The servers were still adjusting, but the initial feedback from the staff was promising. They weren't relying on tips, but they were noticing the benefits of knowing exactly what they were going to make each week. For many, this stability was a welcome change. Still, there were moments of tension. In some restaurants, longtime employees struggled to adapt to the new system. They felt like they had lost something by not receiving tips, and the weight of that loss wasn't easy to ignore. John had been visiting restaurants across the country, talking to staff and addressing concerns. He knew it would take time, but he was confident the model would eventually win over the skeptics. One night, as he walked through one of the new tipping-free restaurants, he overheard a conversation between a server and a customer. The customer asked, "So, how do you feel about the tipping-free system?" The server hesitated for a moment before responding. "At first, I wasn't sure about it, but now, I get it. I don't have to worry about whether or not I'll make enough money on a slow night. I'm being paid fairly, no matter what." The customer nodded. "That's good to hear. I guess that makes dining out a lot less stressful for everyone, huh?" John smiled as he walked past, overhearing that conversation. It was small moments like that that reminded him why they were doing this. He had believed in the tipping-free model from the start, but seeing it in action, hearing the positive reactions from workers and customers alike, was confirmation that they were on the right path. By the end of the week, the tipping-free movement had firmly planted its flag in the restaurant industry. The pilot program had been successful beyond expectations, and the plan to expand nationwide was already in motion. There were still obstacles ahead, still people who doubted the long-term viability of the model. But John knew that this was just the beginning. As he looked out over the city skyline that evening, he thought about how far they had come. From the initial criticism to the nationwide rollout, they had faced resistance, but they had pushed through. And now, the tipping-free model was set to change the restaurant industry for good. In that moment, John couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. They were on the verge of something revolutionary. The tipping-free future was here, and it was only just the beginning. It had been months since the tipping-free model had gone national, and John sat in the same restaurant where it all began. The once familiar hustle of a busy dining room now felt like the calm after a storm. The tipping-free revolution had become a reality, and though the road had been long and at times uncertain, the results spoke for themselves. The restaurant was packed as always, but there was a new sense of serenity in the air. Servers no longer anxiously checked the tip jar at the end of their shifts. Customers weren't fumbling with their bills or wondering whether they had left enough. It had become second nature for everyone, employees and guests alike. The tipping-free model had not only changed the way people dined, it had changed the way people viewed work and compensation in the restaurant industry. John smiled as he watched the staff move with a new sense of confidence. Rachel, now the regional manager for several locations, was overseeing the dining room, chatting with customers and checking in with the team. He felt a tap on his shoulder and turned to find Elon, who had arrived just in time for the dinner rush. "You look deep in thought," Elon remarked, sliding into the chair across from John. "I was just thinking about how much has changed," John said, his voice filled with gratitude. "A year ago, this was all just an idea. Now look at us. We've changed the entire industry." Elon leaned back, his face betraying a rare moment of satisfaction. "We've done something big, John. This is more than just a business. This is about reshaping how we think about work. It's about creating a future where people don't have to depend on the whims of customers to make a living." "That's something I'm proud of." John nodded, the weight of the accomplishment sinking in. But he knew that this success wasn't just about the tipping-free model. It was about what it represented: fairness, stability, and a shift in the culture of work. For years, restaurant workers had lived under the unpredictable nature of tipping. Now, they had a consistent, reliable income. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And in a world that was changing rapidly, it was a significant step forward. As they spoke, a familiar figure walked into the restaurant, one of the many employees who had joined their movement from the beginning. It was Mark, the waiter who had first criticized Elon's tipping practices at the original restaurant. He walked up to the table, his eyes bright with recognition. "You guys are still here?" Mark asked with a laugh, clearly impressed. "Of course," John said, standing up to shake Mark's hand. "We're not going anywhere. How's everything going with the new system?" Mark smiled. "It's been a game changer. I can finally pay my rent without worrying if I'm going to make enough tips this month. It's not perfect, but it's the stability we've needed for years. Honestly, I never thought I'd see the day where this actually worked, but here we are." John looked at Mark, his heart swelling with pride. This was why they had fought so hard, to change the system, to make sure people like Mark could count on their paychecks instead of relying on the generosity of strangers. "It's not just about the money, though," Elon added, joining in. "It's about giving workers dignity, respect, and an opportunity to build their careers without being held back by an outdated system." Mark nodded in agreement. "That's exactly it. I don't have to feel like I'm begging for tips anymore. I'm getting paid what I'm worth. No more guessing games. And the customers, they love it too. It's less stressful for everyone." John and Elon exchanged a glance, both feeling the weight of what they had accomplished together. This wasn't just about one person's vision. It was the collective effort of many individuals who had taken a leap of faith and committed to making a change. As the evening wore on, the restaurant continued to bustle with life. The tipping-free model had settled into the fabric of the dining experience. It was no longer a conversation starter. It was simply how things worked now. There were still challenges to face, but the foundation was solid. John looked out over the dining room, watching as servers efficiently delivered food to tables, their smiles genuine, their focus on providing great service rather than anxiously eyeing their tips. He realized this was what they had all hoped for, a system that allowed people to do their best work without the added pressure of financial uncertainty. He glanced at Elon, who was engaged in conversation with Rachel about the future of the movement. For the first time in a long while, John felt a sense of peace. The tipping-free model had not only changed the restaurant industry, it had created a ripple effect. It was no longer just a local initiative. It was part of a larger conversation about fair wages, employee rights, and the way work should be valued. It had taken countless hours of hard work, endless meetings, and countless setbacks, but in the end, it had been worth it. John's phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a message from the food service conglomerate. National rollout is complete. You've made history. He stared at the message for a moment, the weight of the words sinking in. History. It was official. The tipping-free model was now the new norm. He put the phone down, his gaze returning to the bustling restaurant. This was just the beginning. As the night grew darker, John couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought him here. It hadn't always been easy. There had been moments of doubt, resistance, and struggle. But through it all, they had stayed focused on their vision. A vision that had come to life and would continue to grow, one restaurant at a time. John stood up and clinked his glass with Elon's. "To the future," he said, his voice filled with optimism. "To the future," Elon replied, smiling. And in that moment, as they looked out at the thriving restaurant and the dedicated workers who had helped make the tipping-free revolution a success, they both knew that the world of dining was forever changed.